The first thing you lose out there is the sound of other people. Most folks don't notice the silence right away. They're too busy unloading bikes, hooking up hoses, laughing over camp chairs that never fold right. But once the sun slips low beyond the pines of Angelina National Forest and you stop moving, the quiet sinks into your bones. It feels like something waiting for you to make the next sound. My name is Marcus. I'm 37, born and raised in San Antonio. I've been camping out of my Volkswagen camper van for 5 years now, not because I'm escaping life, but because I'm finally living it the way I want. Nature soothes me, makes sense of everything I can't fix. And yet, every traveler has that one place that changes the rules. The kind of place you think you understand until the land starts paying attention to you. For me, that place was Angelina National Forest in East Texas. I went there chasing peace. I left questioning reality, wondering why so many who come here disappear, and why no one talks about it loud enough for outsiders to hear. I arrived in late November, hunting season. The days were still warm and clear, but nights carried a bite sharp enough to make the campfire feel like salvation. My campsite sat off a small forest road near the Sam Rayburn Reservoir. The lake stretched farther than my eyes could follow, flat and dark as obsidian when the wind stilled. My van was parked under towering loblolly pines, their needles whispering like restless feathers overhead. I told myself it would be the perfect long weekend, hiking by day, reading by lantern light at night, feeling the worries of real life loosen their grip. But from the first evening, something was off. It began around dusk when I went for a short walk along the reservoir's edge. The path twisted between trees whose trunks were scorched, not from a recent wildfire, but something older, more deliberate. Every few yards I found another blackened symbol carved into bark, circles intersected by jagged lines like suns with broken rays. I ran my fingers over one. The wood felt strangely cold, as if the fire that made it had burned heat out of the world rather than into it. I brushed it off. Texas is full of hunters and weirdos. Graffiti on trees isn't exactly supernatural, but the silence reminded me there was no one else around to blame. Back at camp, I cooked a simple dinner on the propane stove. Beans, sausage, toast. The familiar smell comforted me, reminded me of why I fell in love with the road. The freedom to be small and unimportant, surrounded by everything bigger than me. When darkness settled fully and stars spilled across the sky like scattered salt, I settled into my camp chair, letting the cold nose of the wind graze my face. Then a sound cut through the silence, a whistle. 3 notes, rising in pitch. Not a bird, too precise, too intentional. It echoed from deep within the trees. I sat upright, heart tight against my ribs. Probably a hunter. Still, something about it set my nerves on edge. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the forest. Nothing but pines casting long shadows like leaning giants, guarding secrets older than asphalt and headlights. I called out, "Hello? Somebody out there?" No reply. Just that heavy, watching quiet again. Finally, I convinced myself it was nothing and crawled into the van. My bed was set up in the back, blankets tucked tight against the growing cold. I closed the sliding door and listened to the forest breathe through the thin metal walls. That's when I heard the footsteps, soft at first, a shuffle of leaves, then clearer, slow, deliberate. Walking right past the passenger door, I held my breath and darkness inside the van swallow me whole. My fingers dug into the blanket. No flashlight now. I didn't want to be seen. A voice followed, barely louder than the wind. Where? The words slipped between trees like a lost thought, like someone trying to find a memory. Where are you? The footsteps stopped. I stared at the van ceiling and prayed it was just my mind turning silence into monsters. After a long minute, or maybe 5, the presence faded. No more crunching leaves. No more whispers. Just the hum of my own blood racing. I barely slept. Morning brought sunshine that felt cruel in how normal it made everything seem. Birds chirped again. I laughed at myself, embarrassed by how rattled I felt. Nighttime has always been humanity's oldest enemy, our fear of what we can't see, but I still checked for footprints. Around the van, the pine needles showed signs something, or someone, had stood very close. The ground wasn't disturbed enough to identify shape or shoe, just impressions where weight had settled. Watching. I shook it off again. Being alone in the woods can make shadows feel alive. I set out for the hiking trails, determined not to let irrational fear ruin my weekend. The sun warmed my back, and my boots crunched a steady rhythm through the forest. I found myself breathing easier. Trees were just trees again. Wind just wind. Then I reached the clearing. The forest opened to a circle of stumps, 12 of them, evenly spaced like numbers on a clock. Each stump bore scorch marks matching the tree graffiti. Some charred shapes looked like figures with long limbs, heads too wide for human proportions. In the center lay a massive boulder split clean in two, as though struck by lightning, yet the ground around it showed no burn pattern. Someone had been here, recently. I leaned down to inspect the cracked stone and froze. There were scratches across its surface. Not random. Letters. Help us. Panic flickered, but rationality shoved it down. Probably a prank. A messed up one, sure. But a prank. Still, I decided to head back. My excitement for adventure felt smothered by something unseen, something that pressed against the edges of my awareness, quietly reminding me I wasn't alone here. On the way to camp, I spotted a park ranger truck pulled onto the side of the dirt road. The ranger, a tall man in his 50s, face weathered like tree bark, stepped out and waved me down. "You camping out here solo?" he asked, adjusting his brimmed hat. I nodded, just for the weekend. His eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the woods like he expected something to emerge. Folks around these parts know not to wander too deep. Some of this land isn't meant for people. He paused. "If you hear anything strange tonight, stay inside. Don't try to find the source." The wind kicked up. Pine needles hissed on the ground like startled snakes. I tried to laugh it off. "That's supposed to make me feel safe?" He didn't smile. "It's meant to keep you alive." He tapped the truck door, hesitating as if deciding whether to say more. "People go missing every year," he finally said. "And the ones we find don't remember what happened, the ones we don't." His jaw tightened. "You just stay aware. If the forest calls your name, you don't answer. Got it?" He climbed back into his truck and drove away, tires spitting gravel like sparks. I stood alone on the road, his warning sinking into me like a cold blade. That night, I double-checked every lock on the van, ate dinner inside, kept the flashlight within reach. The forest outside was too quiet again, that uneasy quiet that feels like breath held long past comfort. Around midnight, the whistle returned. 3 notes. Rising, closer than before. Leaves shifted outside. Something brushed along the sliding door. I shut my eyes tight. But then, a voice, clearer this time. "Marcus, not where are you, just my name." Spoken by a stranger who should not have known it. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would shake the van. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The handle of the sliding door trembled. Someone was trying to get in. And that's when it hit me. Whatever was outside didn't feel human. Not anymore. The handle of the sliding door jiggled again. A slow rotation. Testing. Learning the mechanics of an entry it clearly hadn't used before. I'd parked the van so the passenger side faced the forest. The driver's side, at least, faced the open moonlit clearing. A blessing I didn't realize I'd given myself until that exact moment. Marcus, there it was again. My name carried on a low voice that didn't match any I'd ever heard. It dragged syllables like something unfamiliar with speech, like an animal forcing itself into the shape of a person. I stayed frozen, praying that whoever or whatever stood outside would believe the van was empty. My breath felt like a flare announcing I was alive, so I held it until my lungs ached. The sound of the forest pressed in tight. Every pop of bark expanding in the cold felt like a footstep. Every creak of the wind pushing branches felt like weight shifting outside my thin metal walls. Then the handle stopped. Silence. Taut and purposeful. I risked a slow inhale, just enough air to keep me from blacking out. For a few seconds, long ones, nothing moved. And then I heard it walk away. Not into the forest, around, to the front. I scrambled quietly from the bed to the front seat, peering through a gap in the curtain. Moonlight silvered the windshield. Pine shadows stretched long. Nothing human stood in sight. But something was there. The glass caught a glint, two pale points reflecting light. Eyes, only visible when they flicked toward me. They were too far apart, too steady. They didn't blink. They rose higher, as if whatever owned them were lifting itself taller. I flinched back, saw a pulse slamming my throat. The van didn't shake. No footsteps. Just that presence watching me from a distance. It chose. Minutes crawled by before the forest reclaimed its silence. I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn finally cracked open the dark, I stepped out shivering despite the warming air. Pine needles clung to the tires like they'd been disturbed. My door handle bore faint smears, grime from a dirty palm or maybe mud from something not quite shaped like fingers. I packed up my camp fast, ready to leave early, but the rational part of me wrestled for control. I'd driven 4 hours to get here. That kind of fear is exactly how people ruin good things they love. I'd come to this forest craving peace. Maybe I'd simply projected nightmares into shadows. I needed proof something had happened, or a convincing reason it hadn't. So I drove to the ranger station. The building sat alone among pines, its windows reflecting the lake like eyes too tired from witnessing too much. The same ranger I'd spoken to yesterday stepped out the door as I parked. His face didn't hold surprise, only recognition I couldn't explain. "You made it through the night," he said. Not a question. "Someone was at my van," I told him, voice shaky despite my best efforts. "Tried to get in. They said my name." He removed his hat, exhaling a long, heavy breath. "I need you to come inside." The station smelled of old maps and stronger coffee. On the wall behind the desk hung a dozen photos clipped to a board. People smiling in front of tents, holding fish, standing with family, typical campground shots. But every one of them had the same small handwritten sticker affixed to the corner. Unfound. I stepped closer. Men, women, children, different ages, different dates. One photo stopped my heart. It was taken right in front of Sam Rayburn Reservoir. The woman in the picture, maybe mid-30s, stood beside her RV, giving a modest smile. Eyes bright. The sticker read, "Unfound, November 2019. Last seen near lakeside campsites 4 years ago. Same month, same location." "How many?" I whispered. "More than there should be," he said. He poured himself a coffee, but didn't offer any to me. Maybe he saw the tremor in my hands, or maybe he didn't expect me to want it. He leaned against the counter, posture stiff. "There are stories," he said, staring past me like watching something move behind my shoulder. "Old ones from before this land was forested. The Caddo people believed spirits lived in the dark places where the pines now stand. Not ghosts, not demons. Something older than those ideas. Something that mimics life but cannot understand it." I swallowed hard. "What does that have to do with the disappearances?" He tapped a finger against the map pinned to the table. A circle drawn around a region deep in the forest, miles off established trails. Those symbols burning into the bark. People have been marking boundaries for decades trying to contain whatever's there. Hunting parties carved them. Loggers. Even earlier, settlers tried. But it doesn't like boundaries. And it's patient. His voice thin and cracking. It watches. It calls. And when someone answers, they walk away from the world and never walk back. I remembered the voice outside my van, pulling my name into the night like thread through a needle. "What does it want?" I asked. The ranger looked out the window again, face hollow, to replace what it lost. A chill stabbed up my spine. My fear wasn't just for myself anymore. There was a grief in his tone, a confession buried under duty. "Who did it take from you?" I finally asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The photo board did. Second row, far left, a teenage boy. Same jawline, same eyes, unfound. The ranger lifted his hat back onto his head like armor. "You need to leave, son. Today. Now." I nodded, throat tight. I moved toward the exit but paused with a hand on the door. "Why are you still here?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. Then, "I stay so others don't become like them." The drive back to camp was a blur of rattling thoughts and pine shadows slicing past the windows. My heart kicked at me to flee the forest altogether, find a busy road, put distance between myself and whatever hunted here. But I still needed to break down camp. I still needed to gather my things. I told myself I'd be quick. The moment I stepped out of the van, the wind died. No birds, no insects, no ripple on the lake, just stillness. And then a new sound. Low, mechanical. Faint but growing. I turned toward the forest road, headlights bobbing between the trees, an RV rolling slowly toward me, weathered sides, windows dark, relief surged. Another camper, another person, company. But as it crept closer, something was wrong. The headlights didn't illuminate the ground, they just glowed without casting shadows. The RV came to a stop not 10 yards away, engine silent, the door hissed open, and a voice, familiar and broken, spilled out, "Marcus, come see." It was my voice. My name spoken by my own tone, warped, stretched by a mouth that was not mine. I stepped back, stumbling into pine needles. The passenger side mirror reflected a form inside the RV, a silhouette that matched my height, my shoulders, my stance. My double tilted its head as if studying prey it recognized. "Come see what we can be." Its smile showed teeth identical to mine, except they were too many. Rows where there shouldn't be rows. I turned and ran. Every instinct screamed. My lungs burned with the kind of desperation that pulls childhood memories of running from nightmares you can't see. Yet I heard it behind me. Not footsteps, but the forest shifting as though clearing a path for something faster than flesh should allow. Branches whipped my arms. Thorns tore skin. I didn't care. The urge to survive drowned all pain. I glanced back once. Mistake. The RV wasn't following, but something had stepped from the door. Tall. Wrong. My shape refitted around a body that didn't know how bones should bend. A mimic learning its puppet. It was smiling my smile. A crescent stretched too wide. "Marcus." It didn't yell. It whispered, inside my skull. And the forest answered, trees groaning like they recognized the new name of the man who would never leave. I didn't realize where I was running until my boot caught a root and I crashed onto a familiar dirt path. The circle of scorched stumps loomed just ahead, the clearing I had found yesterday. I scrambled to my feet, too consumed by terror to consider turning back. The forest pushed at my back like a hand urging me toward the center. My breath heaved and smoke like fog escaped my mouth, though the morning sun should have warmed the air. Pine needles spun across the ground in frantic spirals. The wind wasn't blowing, the air felt still, and yet the debris moved as if pulled toward that circle. I staggered into the clearing, and the pressure behind me released. A fragile silence dropped into place. I spun around, expecting the creature to burst through the trees. Nothing. But the forest looked different now, darker, as if light refused to penetrate past the ring of stumps. The cracked boulder sat in the center like a wound forced open. The message scratched into it, "Help us," looked deeper now. Fresher. I touched the groove with shaking fingers. Warm. A whisper slithered through the clearing. Not air. Not voice. Memory. The surface of the stone flickered like heat haze, revealing vague shapes. Figures standing around the circle, hooded, holding lanterns, and something kneeling in the center, restrained, trembling, crying. Then the vision vanished, leaving only stone beneath my fingertips. My heart hammered. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over one of the stumps. I needed to get back to the road, back to the van, back to anywhere else. But when I turned, the path was gone, replaced by trees, thick, impassable. As if the forest had grown a new wall while I was distracted. No. My voice cracked. I spun in circles, searching for any recognizable direction. Every angle looked identical. Same pines, same shadows, same silence threatening to crush me. The forest was closing the exit. A rustle sounded from behind me, then a snap of a twig. I turned toward the boulder. A figure stepped into view from behind it, the ranger. His eyes were glassy, face slack, like a puppet held up by strings too tight to allow expression. His clothes hung stiff on his body as if they didn't belong to him anymore. "Ranger? Thank God," I began. He lifted a hand sharply, a command for silence. But the gesture wasn't his. The movement was jerky, imprecise, like something inside him didn't fully understand how to operate a human body. His mouth opened, Words dragged out on a growl. They said, "Your name." I stepped backward until my spine hit a stump. "You need to fight," he choked out, voice warping. "Don't listen. Don't look. Don't." His eyes rolled back like something inside was yanking him away from the surface. "Don't let them inside." A wet crack echoed from his chest. His ribs shifted, as if pressed outward by hands forcing their way through from the inside. He shuddered violently. Then his voice changed. "Marcus, that terrible imitation of me." He sprinted, no, lurched toward me, limbs too long, joints bending wrong. I darted sideways just as he collided with the boulder, stone chips flying. I bolted for a gap between trees that hadn't been there a second ago. The forest groaned, branches raking like claws as I forced myself through. Bark scraped my skin raw. Something grabbed the back of my shirt. A hand. Branch. A branch. But I tore free and kept running. Roots shifted beneath my boots, trying to trip me. Pines leaned inward, narrowing the corridor. The forest was reshaping itself with intent. It wanted me back in that clearing. It wanted me where the circle could finish what it started. My legs burned as I fought the terrain. Branches lashed my face, drawing blood. The air thickened, tasting like iron and rot. Finally, I burst into open space, collapsing onto the road gravel near my campsite. My van stood there, waiting. A sanctuary of metal and glass. I didn't look back, didn't breathe. I dove inside, slammed the door, turned the key. The engine sputtered once, died. No, come on. I slapped the wheel, tried again. Starter whined. Nothing. The forest outside held perfectly still. My eyes darted to the passenger side mirror. Something stood just inside the tree line. A silhouette with my proportions, its head tilted the same way mine did when I was confused or amused. It was learning me, wearing me like a suit not yet tailored. It took one slow step forward. I locked the doors, though I knew locks meant nothing to whatever could twist the shape of a man from the inside out. My hand fumbled for the phone. No signal. Of course. Think. The ranger had said one thing that mattered. One rule. If the forest calls your name, don't answer. So why could it speak me? It could only mimic what it heard. Someone had answered before, someone who had been taken, someone it now wore like skin. A wave of nausea rolled over me. Memories flashed, footsteps, whispers, imitations. Those missing campers, the ones labeled unfound, they were not gone, they were not dead, they were templates, shapes awaiting the next recruit. The creature stepped closer to the van. "Marcus, help us." But layered beneath those words were others, softer, pleading. "Help me." The ranger's son, wrapped inside something ancient, tormented by a hunger not his own. My terror battled a sickening compassion. The thing wore his voice, broken and terrified beneath the mimicry. I pressed my palms against my temples. "You're not him," I whispered. "You're not me." A sudden slam, hard, rocked the rear of the van. Then again, louder. Metal groaned. The creature was circling, hunting for a weak point. I crawled into the front seat, yanking down the sun visor. A campground map fluttered into my lap. Something handwritten circled in red ink. "Service Road 19, Ranger Outpost, safe route, keep lights on." The ranger had given this to me when I checked in, and I'd barely glanced at it. My hands trembled as I pushed the key again. The engine coughed. Come on, a shriek outside, like wood splitting with a human throat behind it. Engine roared to life. I floored it. The van lurched forward, gravel spitting behind as I tore down the road. But the headlights barely reached 10 feet ahead. Darkness swallowed everything else. The forest leaned in over the road, branches interlocking like ribs of a beast closing around prey. The van bounced and rattled violently, each jolt threatening to throw me off course. I checked the mirrors. Nothing. Then everything. Pine trunks blurred, shadows elongated, shapes emerged in the spaces between trees. People-shaped. But wrong. They ran beside the van, limbs stretching too far, heads twitching like owls learning motion. Their mouths hung open, not breathing, just wide. And behind them, further back, the ranger, or what was left wearing his uniform. His legs moved with inhuman precision, no up-down motion, simply gliding across the ground like he wasn't bound by gravity anymore. His eyes were empty night. My stomach twisted. I pushed the accelerator flat to the floor. Faster, faster. The road bucked under the tires. The steering wheel jerked violently. For a horrifying moment, the wheels lost contact with the dirt, then slammed back down. Lights. Ahead. Dim. Flickering. A lantern hanging outside the ranger station. When I reached it, I braked so hard the van fishtailed and skidded into a stop sideways. I stumbled out, sprinting for the door. Locked. I pounded my fist against the wood. "Let me in!" Movement inside. Footsteps. Then the latch clicked. The ranger, the real one, opened the door just wide enough to pull me through before slamming it shut again and ramming a heavy bolt into place. His chest heaved. Sweat dripped from his brow. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, voice shredded. "I saw it," I gasped. "I saw." His hand clamped onto my shoulder, fingers digging hard enough to bruise. "No, that's how it gets you, by letting you see." He dragged me away from the windows, toward the back room filled with radios and maps. "They won't step onto this ground," he said quietly. "Not yet." The windows behind him rattled, hard. Glass quivered like something pressed a face against the other side. "And why is that?" I asked, fear making my words thin. He swallowed, eyes fixed on the rattling panes. "Because I made a trade." The room fell cold. My heartbeat stalled. "What kind of trade?" I whispered. He turned to face me fully, grief cracking through every line on his face. "My son is still in those woods, and they said they'd give him back." His voice broke. "If I help them find someone to replace him." His hand slid from my shoulder, too gently. The realization hit like a blow to the spine. I was their replacement. He stepped back, out of reach, eyes burning with resignation. "I'm sorry, Marcus." Behind us, the door began to open, slowly on its own. The hinges groaned as the ranger station door cracked open, just a sliver, but enough for cold to seep into the room like mist with intention, enough for the lights to flicker, their warm glow trembling against a darkness that wanted to swallow the walls whole. I stepped back until my spine hit the radio desk. My pulse roared in my ears. The ranger stood a few feet away, shoulders hunched, hat shadowing his eyes, looking like a man who'd already handed himself over to his own damnation. "You don't have to do this," I whispered. His voice came back hollow. "I already did." A shape pressed through the widening gap in the door. Not a full body, not yet, just a hand. Pale, too many joints, knuckles rising and falling like vertebrae. The fingertips were split into points that shifted, searching the air like antennae, tasting fear. I grabbed the nearest thing within reach, a heavy flashlight. The hand spilled farther inward, dragging the door open another few inches. A hiss rode the air like dry leaves scraping inside a throat too long. I felt my mind tilt. Every instinct screamed that the human brain wasn't meant to witness this geometry of anatomy. "You help them," I said to the ranger, voice cracking, "and they'll take you too." His expression flickered, a small war waging behind the wariness. "They already took me," he murmured. Something in the way he said it felt final, a man already hollowed out, living only on the edges of his own life. No more time. The hand lurched forward faster than anything made of bones should move. It scraped across the floorboards, leaving grooves like claw marks burned into wood. I raised the flashlight, swung with every ounce of terror-driven strength. A wet crack. The limb recoiled, twisting unnaturally. A screech like metal tearing apart rattled through the room, not from the creature, but from the walls themselves. I shoved past the ranger and sprinted toward the back room. The emergency exit I prayed existed. The door there was half hidden behind maps and battered filing cabinets. I yanked it open. A staircase descended into darkness. Behind me, footsteps not aligned with Earth's rules. The hand dragged itself forward from the entrance again. The ranger called after me, voice raw with desperation. "If you run into the forest, they'll take you faster." I halted at the top step. He was right. The woods were their territory. But staying here, with one man who'd betrayed his own blood? The station lights flared bright, then died. Darkness smothered the hallway. Something moved inside it, not the ranger, not human. Something using the dark as muscle and bone. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling, catching myself only by slamming into the concrete wall below. The basement smelled like damp paper and gasoline. My flashlight flickered weakly, beam slicing a narrow tunnel through the gloom. I scanned for windows, for any exit. There, a steel door marked with chipped red letters, Garage. I bolted toward it, hands stretching for the latch, when a thud from upstairs shook dust loose from the ceiling. Then another, heavy, rhythmic, like feet pounding the floor with too much weight behind them. They were inside. I slammed into the garage door. It creaked open just wide enough for me to squeeze through. I stumbled into a cavern of abandoned equipment. Old Ranger trucks under tarps, chainsaws lined like sleeping sentries, fuel cans stacked in precarious towers. Headlights. My van. Parked at the far end of the garage. But the lights were already on, idling, engine humming. I froze. The keys were in my pocket. Something sitting in the driver's seat turned its head toward me. My face stared back, but hollow. Eyes black like fresh dug soil, lacking any glint of thought. My jaw moved, cracking as though someone unfamiliar with the hinge was forcing it to operate. We are waiting. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping in a puddle of spilled oil. Behind me, upstairs, the creature's footsteps thundered closer, now joined by others. Too many. Too fast. The mimic in my van opened the door, not gracefully, but as though the hinges didn't quite understand their purpose. It stepped out. Body stiff, gait wrong, joints popping like snapping branches. Help us leave. It extended a hand toward me, fingers stretching longer the moment my gaze met them. The request was not spoken from hope, but hunger. I grabbed the handle of the nearest fuel can. Heavy, sloshing. I twisted the cap, gasoline smell hit like a punch. My chest tightened, but fear pushed me forward. Back toward the stairwell, a chorus of whispers built into a humanoid storm. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus. My name twisted into so many wrong shapes that it lost meaning, becoming command instead of identity. I hurled the gasoline forward, coating the mimic's torso and the van's hood. It didn't react. It didn't flinch, didn't blink. It simply took another obedient step toward me, fuel dripping like tears down its stolen skin. Upstairs, the basement door burst. A flood of silhouettes poured down the stairs, not running, not walking, gliding with relentless purpose. They moved in perfect synchronization as if one mind piloted dozens of bodies at once. I reached for the chainsaws, yanked the starter cord once, twice. The engine sputtered and died. No time. The mimic stretched its arms out wide, a gesture almost like a welcoming embrace or a net. We are you are us. I flicked the lighter, it caught. For a split heartbeat, fire hovered in my hands, fragile salvation. Then I threw it. The explosion was instant. Flame roared up the mimic's torso, devouring its imitation of my flesh, stripping the disguise away. Beneath the collapsing human shape writhed something black and crawling, too many limbs unfolding, skin blistering into smoke. The gasoline on the van ignited next. Fire leapt across paint and rubber, growing fangs. The garage became a furnace in seconds. Heat scorched my eyebrows, my lungs screamed. The gliding figures halted at the edge of the flames, their collective voice rising in a sound almost like panic or rage. They retreated. Fire was their boundary. The mimic stumbled backward, collapsing against the van. Its skin bubbled, peeling away to reveal a lattice of splinter-thin bones trying to reform a shape. It clawed toward me, not to attack but to beg, voices overlapping. Let us be. Let us be whole. Help. I dashed past it, past the burning walls, toward the emergency exit hatch I'd spotted overhead. A ladder bolted to the wall led to a narrow grate. I climbed, coughing, muscles seizing. The metal rattled beneath my weight. Below, the fire surged, consuming everything, including the imitation that still reached for me with hands no longer claiming to be mine. My fingers found the grate latch. I shoved it open. Cold air flooded in like a rebirth. I hauled myself onto the ground outside, grass wet beneath my palms, night stretching wide and deep around me. The fire behind cast a glow through the cracks of the garage roof. For one breath, I believed I was safe. Then I heard the forest answer. A howl, a long, drawn-out note not belonging to any animal. The trees groaned. The air thickened, pressing like hands against my chest. And from the depths of the woods, dozens of shapes gathered, watching, waiting. Their eyes glimmered from the shadows, not reflecting my light, but generating their own pale glow. They spread out, forming a wide circle at the forest's edge. The voice returned, now louder, the chorus aligned, unified. Trade, trade, trade. Trees bowed inward as though commanded by the word itself. Behind me, the ranger station cracked, wood splitting under heat and unseen forces. The ranger, the broken man, stumbled out from the front door, coughing, his uniform smoking. He looked around wildly, searching for something or someone. His gaze found me, and then shifted to the circle of waiting creatures. "No," he whispered, voice shattered. "No, this wasn't the deal." He took a step back. But the forest stepped forward. One creature peeled from the group, tall and spider-limbed, and the ranger's face went slack with horror. His son. Or what wore his son's shape now? "Dad," the voice moaned, young, frightened, but layered with a second voice underneath that wasn't human at all. The ranger collapsed to his knees, sobbing. "I'm here, son. I'm here." But the creature didn't come for him. It came for me, because I was the trade. I backed away from both, ranger and monster, every cell screaming that escape was narrowing by the second. The forest surged again, a living wall ready to reclaim its offering. They didn't just want my body, they wanted my shape, my identity, my place in the world. They wanted me to become one of the photos pinned to the wall. Unfound. The fire behind me roared higher. The creatures flinched, even they feared full flame. A choice cracked open before me. Razor thin. Run into the fire, the one thing they couldn't pass through, or run into the forest, the place that never gave anything back. The ranger looked up, eyes full of regret and the last shred of hope. "Don't let them take you," he whispered. I stepped backward, closer to the heat that burned but didn't hunger. The creatures shrieked, voices rising like shattering glass. "Marcus." No, I turned toward the flames, toward pain I could understand, toward survival I could still claim. Heat blasted against my face as I stepped closer to the burning garage. My skin prickled with the kind of pain that felt almost cleansing, like the fire recognized me as something still human, still separate from the forest watching hungrily behind me. Flames licked up the siding, crackling louder than the whispers calling my name. "Marcus, trade, trade." The chorus pressed harder, climbing my spine like cold fingers. They wanted me terrified. They wanted me desperate enough to make a mistake. They wanted me to believe the fire was my enemy, when really it was their prison. I stared through the waves of heat at the twisted silhouette of the mimic still burning near the van. Its remaining features, warped into a sculpture of agony, began collapsing inward like melting wax. Every bit of stolen humanity peeled away, a glimpse of what I would become if they took me. The ranger, still on his knees, ash coating his shirt, reached out weakly as I passed him. "Take me," he croaked toward the forest. "He doesn't deserve this. I'm the one who failed." Something answered from the trees, a low rumble, more idea than sound. No more bargains. His shoulders sagged. His grief became a physical collapse. And then a new voice broke through. Higher. Younger. "Dad?" We both turned. The shape of his son stood at the edge of the flames, the same boy from the photo, dusty blonde hair, red windbreaker, except his eyes weren't hollow black pits like the others. For one aching heartbeat, he looked. Alive. "Dad," he whispered, "you came back." The ranger lurched forward, tears streaking through the soot on his face. "I never stopped trying," he rasped. The boy smiled, small, hopeful. Then his jaw unhinged. Not metaphorically, literally. Bones snapping as the mouth opened wider than a human skull could ever allow. Rows of new teeth unfolded like wet knives. His arms extended, bone bowing outward, welcoming the embrace that would end the man who raised him. The ranger didn't run. He didn't even flinch. He whispered, "I'm so sorry," and let the imitation of his son wrap him in its impossibly long arms. The creature dragged him back toward the forest. I should have looked away. But I watched. I watched as that loving silhouette of a father and son dissolved into the shadows beneath the pines, leaving behind only the echo of a man's final acceptance. The circle of creatures tightened around the clearing. Trade. Trade. Their demand stabbed the air, slicing into my thoughts. I took a step back, deeper toward the burning building, and spotted something in the garage debris. A fire axe hung on the half-collapsed wall, metal gleaming. A tool, a weapon, a way out. I lunged for it, grabbing the handle through a curtain of sparks. Heat seared my knuckles, pain real enough to ground me in my body. The nearest creature, something shaped like a woman but built from angles that no bone should form, surged toward me at the sight of the axe. I didn't hesitate. I swung, the blade buried into its shoulder. A burst of black, tar-like fluid spewed across the floor. The thing shrieked, not from the wound, but from being forced to acknowledge it. It staggered away, body contorting as if trying to remember how pain worked. They were fallible. The forest screamed, a chorus twisting into frenzy. The ground shook beneath my boots. Roots erupted from the soil, writhing like tentacles, shooting toward me. I stumbled back, using the fire to shield one side of my body. The roots recoiled from the flames, smoking. All at once I understood the truth. Fire wasn't just a boundary. It was a weapon against them. But I couldn't drag a burning building across the forest. I needed something else that fire respected, something mobile. My van was lost. The station was collapsing. The ranger had given himself away. My lungs burned from smoke and fear. Then I heard it, distant but real, distant but real. A diesel engine, a horn, headlights slicing through the trees like a rescue flare. A logging truck barreled down the road, brakes squealing as the driver spotted the inferno and the madness unfolding around it. The creatures flinched from its high beams, shrinking like mold exposed to sunlight. The passenger door swung open. A man in reflective gear shouted over the roar, "Get in!" No chance to think, just movement. I sprinted, dodging roots slamming into dirt like spears. A creature leapt, a shape half unmade by fire, but I drove the axe into its chest midair and kept running, breath tearing, legs screaming. The truck lurched forward just as I grabbed the handle, the ground crumbling beneath where I'd stood a second earlier. I hauled myself inside. The door slammed. The driver floored it. The truck growled and climbed through gears. Tires spat gravel. Flames and shadows warped behind us, and the forest gave chase. Shapes blurred between trees, dozens of them, moving faster than the truck. Their screams rose into a unified roar that clawed at the inside of my skull. We are not done. Branches raked the trailer. Something massive slammed against the cab. The truck fishtailed, but the driver wrestled it straight. I dared look back once. The ranger's son, or what mocked that memory, stood alone in the road, head tilted back, jaw wide, watching, not pursuing, because the four isn't leaving, not tonight. The trees behind him shifted, sealing the road as though stitching shut a wound. Whatever power lived inside that place withdrew, resentful but patient. The creatures faded into the pines like ink dissolving in water. The headlights carried us into true night, away from the reach of something that did not forget the names it learned. Silence followed. Not the dangerous silence of the forest, but the exhausted silence after survival. The driver slowed as distance thickened, the truck finally coasting to a trembling stop on the main road. He turned to me, pale beneath the cabin lights. What the hell happened back there? Words tried to form, but my brain was still catching up with my lungs, and both were shuddering. They wanted me, I said eventually, and he gave me to them. The driver stared at me like I was speaking in riddles. Maybe I was. Maybe language couldn't hold what lived in that forest. He offered me water. I drank it like it was the first liquid I'd ever tasted. Where do you need to go? He asked. Anywhere with people. Anywhere with noise. Anywhere the night is just night and not something alive and hungry. But I shook my head. Just drive, I said. I'll tell you when to stop. He nodded and put the truck in gear. As the miles slipped away, I stared back at the black line of trees shrinking in the rearview mirror. A place that looked like safety from afar. A place that could swallow the world if it grew hungry enough. I thought about the unfound photos on the ranger station wall. They weren't missing. They were claimed, and I realized the secret history of disappearances at Angelina National Forest wasn't a mystery the land hid. It was a warning people refused to understand. Some wilderness doesn't want to be explored, it wants to replace the explorers. Days later, when I finally returned to my van with a tow trailer and a police escort, the clearing was gone. No charred stumps, no symbols, no station. The fire had erased the evidence, or the forest had grown over it, or both. Only the silence remained, but I still hear them sometimes in the rustle of branches, in the whistle of wind through pine needles, calling the name they almost took away. Marcus, and every time, I do not answer. I've always believed that silence is the most deceptive sound in nature. It's never truly silent. It just hides what doesn't want to be heard. My name's Evan, I'm 38, and I've spent most of my adult life chasing the kind of quiet you can't buy, the kind you find tucked away in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains. I bought my RV 3 years ago after a divorce that left me hollow and restless. That thing became more than a vehicle. It was a moving refuge. And when autumn rolled around last year, I decided to drive up through western North Carolina, deep into the mountain valleys, to a small campground I'd seen only once before, Mile Creek Hollow. It wasn't the kind of place you find on apps or travel sites. The sign for it was half rotted, leaning sideways, and the gravel road leading in was narrow enough that tree branches scraped against the RV as I crawled through. But something about its isolation drew me in, that familiar aching need to be unseen for a while. When I arrived, the campground was nearly empty. Just 3 other rigs scattered among the trees, one old Airstream with faded aluminum, a compact camper van near the creek, and a 5th wheel tucked into a shadowed curve of road. The air was sharp, thin with the kind of cold that smells like decaying leaves and wet stone. I parked near the water, set up my small fire pit, and sat there for a long time listening to the mountain breathe. That first night, everything felt right. The stars hung low, unbroken by city light, and the only sounds were the distant rush of water and the soft tapping of branches in the wind. I remember thinking, this is what peace feels like. But the thing about peace is that it can flip without warning. The first hint of wrongness came just before midnight. I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. Slow, measured steps, not the hurried scuttle of an animal, not the fluttering of leaves. Actual footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, circling my RV. I froze, my hand halfway to my phone. The sound stopped near the back of the rig. I waited, long enough for my heartbeat to settle, then slowly pulled back the curtain by the bed window. There was nothing, just the faint reflection of my own eyes in the glass. I told myself it was probably one of the other campers, maybe walking a dog or checking their fire. But deep down, something about the rhythm of those steps, even unbroken, too controlled, didn't feel right. When I stepped outside the next morning, I saw it. A line of muddy boot prints leading from the gravel road straight to my RV door, then away toward the tree line. They weren't mine. I hadn't left the rig after dark. The prints were large, wider than average, and deep enough to suggest weight. The logical part of me tried to shrug it off. People wander. Maybe some drunk hiker had gotten lost, but when I looked toward the tree line, something about the forest felt attentive, like it was holding its breath. That afternoon, I went to introduce myself to the other campers, maybe just to confirm that I wasn't losing it. The man in the Airstream said he hadn't seen or heard anyone. The couple by the creek, an older husband and wife from Georgia, looked uneasy when I mentioned the prints. The husband said quietly, "Strange things happen up here sometimes. Best to keep your door locked." He said it like a warning, not advice. By the time night came again, the unease had settled in. I double-checked every latch, closed the blinds tight, and left a small lantern burning inside. But that didn't stop the sounds. It started around 2 a.m., a faint rhythmic tapping on the side of the RV, not scraping, not knocking, just a steady tap, 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 like someone was running their fingernail against the metal siding. I held my breath and listened. It moved, first by the back window, then the passenger side, then the door. I whispered out loud, Who's there? But the sound stopped instantly, like whoever or whatever it was had been waiting for me to speak. Then the forest went quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. Even the creek sounded muted, like something had blanketed the whole world in stillness. I sat there until dawn, too afraid to move. The next morning, I found nothing, no new prints, no marks, no sign of disturbance. But when I turned to check my firewood pile, I noticed something strange. My folding camp chair, which I always kept under the awning, was now sitting 10 feet out, perfectly centered in the clearing, facing the woods. It looked almost intentional. I remember laughing, but it wasn't a real laugh, just something to stop my hands from shaking. I picked it up, folded it, put it back, told myself it was the wind, or maybe raccoons. But deep down, that lie didn't fit. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the lantern burning, the windows closed, and the key turned in the lock. Every sound outside, the rustling, the creak of trees, felt magnified, deliberate. When dawn finally came, the light felt like a rescue. I decided I'd leave the next morning, pack up, drive down the mountain, find somewhere crowded and loud. But as the sun dipped again behind the ridge, something in me resisted, a strange stubbornness. I didn't want to leave out of fear. I wanted to know what was out there, what had been circling me at night. So instead of running, I stayed. I built a larger fire that night, dragged my chair closer to it, and sat with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The woods felt alive in a way I couldn't describe. Too still, too focused. Then, just before midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, but this time not on gravel, on leaves. Coming from the tree line, moving toward me, slow and heavy. I aimed my flashlight into the dark. The beam cut through the mist and landed on something pale. Not skin, but fabric. A torn sleeve, maybe, hanging just behind a tree. "Hey!" I shouted, stepping forward. The fabric shifted, then vanished behind the trunk. When I reached it, there was nothing there, just the faint smell of wet earth and smoke. But on the bark of that tree, someone or something had carved a shape. A crude, uneven spiral about the size of my hand, freshly cut, with bark shavings still clinging to the grooves. The spiral turned counterclockwise. That small detail stuck in my head for hours after. I didn't know why, but it felt wrong. Like it wasn't just a mark, but a message. As the night wore on, I sat in my RV, the spiral burned into my thoughts. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The tapping didn't come that night, nor the footsteps. But I knew it wasn't over. Because sometimes the silence doesn't mean it's gone. It means it's closer than before. Because sometimes the silence doesn't mean it's gone. It means it's closer than before. The following morning, I woke up to frost on the windows. A thin white film, fragile as dust, spidered across the glass. The fire pit outside was dark and cold, and the smell of smoke still clung to my clothes. I hadn't slept more than an hour, yet I felt oddly alert, like something inside me had accepted that rest wasn't safe here anymore. When I stepped outside, I noticed something new. Across the clearing near the creek, the older couple's camper was gone, vanished. No tire tracks, no sign of packing up, just an empty spot of flattened grass where their rig had been. I thought maybe they'd left early, but their firewood pile was still there, and a half-burnt log sat in their ring, blackened but untouched. I walked over, calling out, half expecting to see them by the creek or on a morning walk. But there was no sound of movement, no voices, no sign of life at all. Only the quiet trickle of water and the faint smell of something metallic in the air, like rust or blood. I backed away slowly, that creeping instinct screaming again, the one I'd ignored before. The man in the Airstream was still there, though. I saw him standing near his door, smoking, watching me. His expression was blank, like he already knew what I was about to ask. When I told him the couple was gone, he just nodded once and said, "Yeah." They left before dawn. Didn't say goodbye. But the way he said it made me doubt him. His eyes flicked toward the woods behind me, then back to his cigarette. I asked if he'd seen anyone else around, hikers, hunters, park rangers, and he shook his head slowly. "Nobody comes this deep anymore," he said. "Not since last year." I waited for him to explain, but he didn't. He just turned and went back inside his Airstream, closing the door with a hollow metallic click. By noon, clouds had rolled in, heavy, gray, pressing low enough to touch the treetops. The temperature dropped fast. I spent most of the day inside the RV trying to convince myself to leave before nightfall, but every time I started the engine in my mind, I'd freeze. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a strange, heavy pull, like the mountain itself wanted me to stay. I told myself I'd leave in the morning, one last night. That was it, just to prove to myself that whatever was happening here didn't own me. That night, I lit another fire, smaller this time. The air smelled different, thick like the damp breath of something unseen. I sat in my chair, staring at the tree line. The spiral carved on that tree was still visible in the beam of my flashlight, and for reasons I can't explain, I kept glancing toward it like it might start moving. Around 10 p.m., I noticed something strange. The forest noise had vanished again, not just quiet, but absent. No insects, no wind, not even the usual rustle of leaves. Then, out of nowhere, the smell hit me. That same metallic tang from earlier, stronger now, sharp and foul, like wet iron mixed with decay. And then came the sound. Not footsteps this time, something else. It was low, rhythmic, almost like someone dragging a stick across the ground in slow, even strokes. It came from the direction of the spiral. I stood, grabbed my flashlight, and shone it toward the trees. Nothing. The light seemed to get swallowed by the fog curling in from the creek. I took a few steps forward, the crunch of my boots loud against the stillness. The dragging stopped. Then, a whisper. So faint I almost thought I imagined it. My name. Evan. It came from the woods, maybe 20 feet out, from behind the same tree with the spiral. My heart slammed against my ribs. I swung the flashlight toward it, my voice cracking as I shouted, "Who's there?" No answer, just the echo of my own voice bouncing off the trees. And then movement, a flicker of pale gray just beyond the edge of the light. Tall, thin, wrong in shape. I stepped back fast, tripped over my chair, and fell. The flashlight rolled away, its beam spinning wildly across the ground before dying against the side of my RV. By the time I scrambled to my feet, the woods were still again, empty, but I could feel something watching me. I backed toward the door, locked it behind me, and shut off every light except the one by the bed. The RV felt smaller than it ever had, like the walls were closing in. Hours passed, maybe minutes. I don't know. Then came the sound of breathing. It was faint at first, almost blending with the hum of the fridge. A slow, steady inhale, exhale, coming from right outside the window. I didn't dare look. I just sat there, gripping the edge of the table, staring at the reflection in the glass. Then came the whisper again, closer this time. Evan. I lunged for the blinds, yanked them down, and there, just for a split second, was a face pressed against the glass. Pale, hollow-eyed, lips moving but no sound coming out. I fell backward, hit the floor hard. By the time I looked up again, it was gone. I grabbed my keys, started the engine, and floored it. Gravel flew out from under the tires as I tore down the road, branches scraping the sides like fingers. The headlights cut through the fog, but the road twisted endlessly, switchback after switchback. I must have driven 20 minutes before I realized I wasn't getting any closer to the highway. The same landmarks kept passing by, the crooked pine, the rusted guardrail, the fallen sign. Over and over, like I was looping through the same stretch of mountain. At one point, I stopped the RV in the middle of the road, breathing hard, trying to make sense of it. My GPS was dead. My phone showed no signal. And when I looked out through the windshield, I saw it again, the spiral, carved into a tree directly in front of me, fresh and gleaming in the headlights. That's when it hit me. I was being led, or trapped. The forest wasn't random. It was deliberate. It wanted me to stay. I reversed, turned the RV around, tried another direction. But the fog was thicker now, glowing white in the lights, hiding everything beyond 10 feet. Then from somewhere deep within it came a low moaning sound, long and broken, like an animal dying slowly. I pressed on the gas, desperate to get out, but the RV jerked violently. Something had hit the side. I slammed the brakes, grabbed the flashlight, and stumbled outside. The air was freezing, dense with that metallic smell again. There was a dent on the passenger side, a clean, round impact mark, like something had thrown a rock the size of a fist. But there were no rocks on the road. And then I saw it, at the edge of the fog, about 20 feet away. A silhouette. Tall, unmoving, watching. I shouted again, demanded to know who it was. No answer, just a low, almost human sigh. And then it stepped back into the mist and vanished. I drove until dawn, until I finally hit a stretch of highway that looked unfamiliar but safe. The fog lifted with the morning light, and for the first time in hours, I could breathe. But when I looked in the side mirror, I saw something that froze my blood. On the back window of the RV, traced through the condensation, was that same spiral, drawn backward, counterclockwise. The symbol stared back at me in the mirror like an eye that refused to blink. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The sun was just breaking through the mist, painting the road gold, but that light felt wrong. Too pale, too thin, like it wasn't really sunlight at all. I pulled over hard, tires screeching, and stumbled out. My boots hit the pavement, still slick with dew, and I stared at the back of the RV. The spiral was there, clear as blood against the fogged glass, drawn with a finger. I wiped it away. My hand came back wet. It wasn't condensation. It was sticky. The air around me seemed to shift, quieter than quiet, heavy enough to make my chest tighten. The trees on either side of the road leaned inward, branches sagging like they wanted to close in. I got back inside and drove. Fast. I didn't look in the mirrors again. I don't remember how long I drove. Maybe hours, maybe days. All I know is that I ended up at a small roadside RV park near Marion, North Carolina. A clean, flat stretch of gravel with maybe a dozen rigs, a gas station across the road, and a diner that smelled like bacon and coffee. Civilization. People. Noise. I parked, paid for 2 nights, and tried to convince myself I'd just had some kind of breakdown up there. Isolation does strange things to your mind. I knew that. Maybe I'd been sleep-deprived, imagining patterns in the dark, making ghosts out of shadows. But that night, when I stepped out to take out the trash, the world tilted again. A sound drifted from somewhere beyond the park. Faint, rhythmic, dragging. I froze, the bag dangling from my hand, the same sound I'd heard near the spiral tree, that slow, deliberate scrape of something heavy across the ground. I turned toward the tree line behind the park. The moon was high, a thin slice of silver cutting through drifting clouds. And there, for just a second, I saw it. A figure, too tall to be human, its limbs wrong, like they'd been stretched and set back at strange angles. It stood half hidden behind a row of pines, still as stone. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was a shadow, that my brain was still wired from the mountain, still replaying the fear. But when I got back inside the RV, there was something sitting on my table that hadn't been there before. A pine cone. Just an ordinary pine cone, except for the small spiral burned into its side. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it, my hands shaking. I don't even remember locking the door, but I must have, because when I woke up hours later, I was still inside, the keys clutched in my fist. I tried to tell someone the next morning. The park owner, a woman in her 60s who wore a denim jacket and looked like she'd been running the place forever. She listened quietly as I talked, nodding, not interrupting once. When I mentioned Mile Creek Hollow, she went still. "That place?" she said finally. "You shouldn't have gone up there." I asked her what she meant. She hesitated, then leaned closer. "People vanish up there," she whispered. "Every few years. Always campers. Some leave their rigs behind, doors open, food still on the stove. Others just drive off and never make it down the mountain." She said the locals talk about something in the woods, not an animal, not a person, something older. She didn't call it a spirit exactly. She called it a pattern. Said the mountain repeats what it touches, that it learns you, that if you stay long enough, it follows you home. I laughed, not because I thought she was crazy, but because it was easier than believing her. But when she handed me my receipt, I saw something scrawled faintly on the back, written in pencil. "Don't let it see your reflection." That night, I covered every mirror in the RV with towels. I shut every curtain, every blind. Still, the air felt heavy, like it was full of whispers too soft to hear. Around midnight, I heard a knock, 3 short, sharp taps on the RV door. I froze. The sound came again, same rhythm, same pace. Not rushed, not hesitant, just intentional. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Then the knocking shifted to the window beside the bed, then the one above the sink, then the rear door. Each time, the same 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. By the time I grabbed my flashlight and swung it toward the noise, the entire RV felt like it was pulsing with it. Taps echoing from every side, overlapping, surrounding me. I pressed my palms against my ears and screamed, and just like that, silence. The next thing I remember, it was morning. My flashlight was still in my hand, batteries dead. I was sitting on the floor near the door, my throat raw. When I stepped outside, every window of the RV was smeared with fingerprints. Not hands, too long, too thin, like someone had dragged their fingers down the glass from the roof to the base. In the dirt beneath the steps, I saw something written in the same looping motion as the spiral. Look behind you. I didn't. I packed up and left within minutes. The drive south was a blur, my body on autopilot, my mind somewhere else entirely. But as I passed through the lower valleys, I started to notice something strange. The spiral. It wasn't just in my memory anymore. It was everywhere. Graffiti on a road sign, etched into the paint on a guardrail, scrawled faintly into the condensation on a passing truck window. Once, I even thought I saw it in the pattern of clouds, twisting downward in slow rotation. I kept driving. Days turned to weeks. I stayed at different parks, rest stops, even Walmart lots, never the same place twice. But no matter where I went, the spiral followed. Sometimes I'd wake up and find one carved faintly into the dirt beside my RV door. Other times I'd hear the dragging sound outside, always distant, but never gone. It wasn't until a few weeks later, when I was camped in a crowded site near Chattanooga, that I finally saw her. A woman in her late 50s, traveling alone in an old Winnebago. She came over to borrow a wrench, and when she smiled, I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach drop. A kind of haunted familiarity. When I handed her the tool, she paused and said, "You've been up there, haven't you?" I didn't have to ask where she meant. "Mile Creek Hollow," she said. "I can smell it on you." She told me she'd gone there years ago with her husband. He'd vanished one night while she was sleeping. She found the spiral carved into their camper door the next morning. She left and never went back, but she said it never really left her either. "It's not a place," she said quietly. "It's a pattern. Once you see it, it sees you, and it doesn't forget." That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept hearing the dragging, the whispers, the breathing, and when I finally gathered the courage to look outside, through a small slit in the curtain, I saw my reflection in the window. But it wasn't moving with me. It was smiling. My reflection, me, smiling when I wasn't. I stood there frozen, staring at that twisted grin in the glass. The corners of its mouth curved too high, too tight, stretching into something that didn't look human anymore. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a distortion from the glass or my own panic. But then it blinked, and I didn't. I stumbled backward, knocking into the counter, the coffee mug from earlier shattering at my feet. My breath came in shallow bursts. I wanted to look away, to turn off every light, but I couldn't move. The reflection tilted its head slowly, still smiling, and then its hand lifted. Mine stayed still. It touched the inside of the glass, palm flat against it, fingers long and thin. I could see every line of my own palm mirrored there, but reversed, the spiral shape faintly traced across its skin, counterclockwise. I ran, not outside, I didn't dare, but to the back of the RV, tearing down every towel I'd used to cover the mirrors. The one in the bathroom was trembling on its mount, vibrating against the wall like something behind it was pushing to get through. I yanked it down and smashed it on the floor. The air turned colder. My breath fogged in front of me. From somewhere outside came that dragging sound again, closer this time, circling the RV like it had up in the mountains. But now, layered beneath it, there was something else. A voice. Soft, almost whispering my name. Not from outside, though. From behind the walls. From inside the vents. From the reflection on the broken shards of mirror at my feet. Evan. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, whispering over and over, "It's not real, it's not real, it's not real," but it was. Because when I looked up again, the shards were moving. Tiny vibrations rippling through them, making the pieces shift. And as they turned, each fragment reflected a piece of the spiral, until the broken glass on the floor formed the shape in full. It was then I understood. The spiral wasn't a symbol, it was a door. And I'd opened it the night I looked through that window in Mile Creek Hollow. The knocking started again. Louder now. Not from one side, but everywhere. The walls, the roof, beneath the floorboards. The whole RV shook like something enormous was pressing against it, testing its strength. Dishes fell from cupboards, the lights flickered, and through it all that whisper. My name, again and again, soft but endless. Evan, Evan, Evan. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was suffocation. My ears rang with it. I could hear my heartbeat pounding through my skull. Slowly, I reached up and touched the wall. It was ice cold. Then, a single sound. A faint tapping on the window above my bed. Tap, tap, tap. I turned, my hand shaking as I lifted the flashlight. The beam hit the glass, and there on the other side was me. Standing in the dark, paler, thinner, smiling. It raised a hand, placed its palm against the glass again. I dropped the light and screamed, stumbling backward until I hit the wall. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a blanket, a pillow, I don't even remember, and ran for the door. When I burst outside, the cold hit me like a wall. The campground was empty, silent except for the low hum of power lines. I looked back, the reflection still there, inside, watching me from the window. Still smiling. And then it began to fade, slowly, dissolving into the condensation until the window was empty again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the picnic table until dawn, staring at the horizon, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. When the sun rose, I packed up what was left, got behind the wheel, and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to keep moving. Every mile that passed, the fear dulled, but it never vanished. The spiral, the face, the voice, they were carved into me now, like something the mountain had written beneath my skin. Days turned to weeks. I made it as far west as Tennessee, camping at small, crowded parks, never alone, always under the comfort of other people's sounds, laughter, radios, engines, anything that wasn't silence. I started to think maybe it had finally let go, that I'd outrun whatever was clinging to me. Until one morning, while washing my hands in a public restroom, I looked down and saw it. Not on the wall, not on the mirror, on my wrist. A faint red line curling slowly inward in a counterclockwise spiral. It wasn't deep, not carved, not bleeding. Just there, beneath the skin, like something waiting to emerge. That was when I realized you can't outrun the mountain, because it's not in the mountains. It is the mountains. It's the pattern beneath everything that lives and breathes out there. You go up there thinking it's wild and free, but the truth is, you're the one being studied, watched, measured, and once it marks you, you belong to it. I kept traveling, though. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to go home. I didn't even know what home meant anymore. The RV had become both my cage and my coffin, a moving reminder of the night I made eye contact with something that wasn't supposed to exist. But somewhere between fear and exhaustion, something changed. The panic began to twist into something else. Not peace, not acceptance, but understanding. I realized I'd been running not from the thing itself, but from what it showed me. The spiral, counterclockwise, wasn't just a symbol of descent. It was reversal, a mirror turning the world inside out. Maybe it wasn't hunting me. Maybe it was forcing me to see how small we really are out there, how fragile the walls we build around ourselves can be. We like to think of the wilderness as freedom, open sky, endless roads, quiet places to park and rest. But it's not rest we find, it's reflection. And sometimes when you stare too long into the quiet, it stares back. I still travel, I still camp, but I don't go into the mountains anymore. I keep to the edges, The lowlands, the highways, the crowded parks. At night, I sit outside with the lantern on and listen to the wind. Sometimes when the air goes still, I catch it again. That faint metallic scent, that dragging sound far off in the trees. And when I hear it, I whisper into the dark, I remember. Because maybe that's all it ever wanted. Not to take, not to haunt, but to be remembered. To be seen. And when the wind dies completely and the stars go silent, I can almost feel it watching. Not with malice this time, but recognition. Like the mountain knows I finally understand what it tried to teach me. That peace isn't found in the absence of fear. It's found in learning to live beside it. And sometimes when I wake in the stillness before dawn and catch my reflection in the RV window, I see that faint smile again. But now, it's mine. The first time I saw the faded sign for the North Lights Motel, I thought it was a mirage, a shimmering reflection off the hood of my old Volkswagen Westphalia. The sky had been the color of slate for hours, the kind of heavy gray that made the world feel like it was closing in on itself. I was somewhere in northern Minnesota, miles past where cell service dropped off, my headlights barely pushing through the mist that clung to the trees. I'd been driving for 12 hours straight, tracing the back roads along the edge of Superior National Forest, chasing the idea of stillness, that feeling you get when you're alone in the world with just the hum of the road and the rattle of your van. But as I slowed to read that cracked neon sign, the stillness started to feel more like silence. And silence, I was learning, can be a dangerous thing when you're too far north. It was supposed to be a short camping trip, a few nights under the stars before the snow came in. I'd been sleeping in the van for months that year, drifting from state to state, living cheap, trying to find something I couldn't name. There's a particular kind of loneliness that hits you when you're camping alone. It's not the absence of people that hurts, it's the sound of your own thoughts echoing off the trees. I'd gotten used to it, the small creaks in the night, the way a raccoon could sound like a bear, the wind turning the branches into whispers. But that night, the whispers felt closer. When I pulled into the North Lights Motel, it was past midnight. The lot was empty, except for a single pickup truck buried in frost, its windows opaque. The office lights were on, flickering in a way that made them pulse against the fog. I parked my Volkswagen near one of the far units, keeping the engine idling, watching the vapor rise from the exhaust. Something in my gut told me to keep going, to find another turnout, or even just pull off the road and sleep. But exhaustion does strange things to reason. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was being paranoid. The office smelled faintly of mildew and stale coffee. A little bell above the door jingled when I stepped in, and after a few seconds, an older man emerged from the back. He was tall, maybe in his late 60s, wearing a plaid jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. His eyes were pale blue, so light they almost looked white. "Didn't expect anyone tonight," he said, his voice flat but not unfriendly. "You camping?" "Sort of," I said. "Just passing through. Thought I'd grab a room for the night before the weather turns." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You'll want number 6. It's the only one I keep heated this time of year. Folks don't come around much once the snow starts." I handed him $40 cash, and he slid a key across the counter. The key tag was plastic, the kind you'd find in a roadside motel 30 years ago, a faded blue triangle with the number 6 written in marker. Before I turned to leave, he said, "If you hear knocking in the night, don't answer it." I stopped, half smiling, waiting for him to grin or laugh. He didn't. His face didn't even twitch. "What?" I asked, the word catching in my throat. He shrugged slightly. "Wind does strange things up here. Just don't answer. That's all." I wanted to ask more. What kind of knocking? Who would knock out here? But I didn't. Maybe it was a local joke. Maybe he was just trying to spook the outsider. Either way, I took the key and stepped back into the cold. The fog had thickened since I parked. The world had gone soft and quiet, the air dense enough to muffle sound. My van looked almost ghostly in the motel lot, the dew already frosting along the windows. I hesitated before going into the room, part of me wanting to crawl into the back of the van instead. But when I opened the door to Unit 6, the warmth hit me instantly. The heater in the corner buzzed and the small space smelled faintly of pine cleaner and something older underneath it, like the scent of damp carpet that's never truly dried. I locked the door, pulled the curtains closed, and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged, the walls were thin, and the light above the nightstand flickered like a dying star. But the heater's steady hum felt comforting, and for a while that was enough. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't the wind, though it moved like it. A slow, rhythmic tapping, 3 knocks, pause, then 2. It came from somewhere near the window. My body went still before my mind caught up, breath shallow, heartbeat thudding in my throat. Knock, knock, knock. Pause, knock, knock. It wasn't loud, just deliberate, like someone testing if I was awake. I thought of what the old man said, don't answer it, but the knocks didn't sound like the wind. They were too precise, too human. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the curtains, waiting for the next sound. It never came. Eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep, the heater humming like a lullaby gone wrong. When morning came, I stepped outside and found frost clinging to everything. The railings, the windows, even my van. The air was so cold it stung my lungs. But what caught my eye wasn't the weather. It was the footprints. A single line of prints in the thin frost leading from the edge of the lot directly to my window and stopping there. No prints leading away. No sign of the person who made them. Just a perfect set of impressions frozen in place, like whoever it was had come to the window and vanished into the air. I went back into the office to return the key, but the man was gone. The bell jingled when I walked in, but the counter was empty. On the wall behind him, I noticed a photo, a grainy black and white picture of the motel, maybe from the 1960s. Snow piled high around it, the same neon sign glowing faintly. I looked closer and felt my stomach tighten. Standing in the doorway of Unit 6 was the same man I'd met last night, only younger, frozen in time by 50 years. I left the key on the counter and walked out without another word. The van started reluctantly, the engine coughing before catching. I told myself I was just tired, that it was probably some trick of the night, a local prank, or maybe my imagination running wild from too much isolation. But as I pulled back onto the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. The road was empty, the forest pressing close, the world a tunnel of fog. A few miles down, I saw something in my rearview mirror, faint headlights in the distance, following at a steady pace. At first, I felt relief. Another traveler, maybe heading to the same town ahead. But as the miles stretched, the lights never gained, never fell back. They stayed exactly 200 feet behind me, unwavering. The road wound deeper into the trees, the fog swallowing the world in gray. My palms were slick on the steering wheel. I turned down a side road, hoping the car would pass, but when I looked again, the lights were still there, hovering in the mist like twin eyes. I pressed the gas harder. The van groaned but held steady. For a moment, I thought I could hear something beneath the engine, a soft knocking sound, steady and familiar. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, coming from somewhere inside the van. I pulled over so fast the van fishtailed on the frost. My hands were shaking before I even cut the engine. The sound stopped instantly, like it had been waiting for me to notice. For a few seconds, I sat there in the dark, listening to my own breath echo inside the Volkswagen, waiting for the next knock. It didn't come. The only sound was the soft tick of the cooling engine and the whisper of wind pushing against the windows. Then I checked the mirrors. The headlights that had been behind me were gone, completely gone, not fading into the distance, just erased like they'd never existed. The fog pressed close around the van, thick and colorless, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. I couldn't even tell where the road ended and the woods began. I told myself to calm down, to think logically. The knocking could have been something shifting inside. The stove, the gear rack, even the spare tire bumping loose. Old vans make noises. I'd lived in mine long enough to know that. But that rhythm, 3 knocks, pause, 2, it wasn't random. It was the same pattern from the motel window. I unzipped the side door and stepped out, half expecting someone to be standing there. No one was. The cold was biting, sharper now, and I could feel the dampness through my socks where frost had formed on the ground. The trees around me looked skeletal, branches curling into the fog like arms reaching. I checked underneath the van, around the wheels. Nothing. But as I circled to the back, I froze. On the rear panel, drawn faintly in the frost, were 5 small circles. Fingerprints. Perfectly spaced, as though someone had rested a hand there. I wiped them away fast, more out of panic than thought, then climbed back inside and locked the doors. Every instinct in me screamed to get back on the road, but something stopped me. A sudden awareness that I couldn't remember where I was. My GPS hadn't worked since the day before, and in the fog, all sense of direction vanished. North, south, it didn't matter. Every road here looked the same. I turned the key and the engine sputtered, coughed, then died. I tried again. Nothing. Just the whine of a starter that had given up. My headlights dimmed, then flickered out completely. I sat in total darkness, and then the knocking started again. This time it came from the back of the van. Slow, deliberate, not the hollow tap of metal shifting. This was skin against glass. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. I didn't move. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield. I could hear my pulse thudding in my ears. There was something primal in that sound, something that hit deeper than logic. Every nerve in my body wanted to run, but where could I go? Into the woods? Into that white fog that felt endless? I whispered to myself, "It's the wind. It's just the wind." But then something answered me. A whisper, faint, hoarse, coming from the other side of the van's wall. It said just one word, my name. Not loud, not sharp, just close. That was when something in me broke. I reached for the ignition again, turned it over, and somehow the van roared back to life like it had been waiting for me to decide. The headlights cut through the fog, and for a brief second I saw something move in front of them. A figure. Tall, thin, pale as frost, stepping backward into the mist with slow, deliberate movements. The face was blurred by fog and motion, but I saw the outline of a hand, the same 5 fingers pressed against glass. Then it was gone. I drove. I don't even remember steering, only that I kept the pedal down and didn't stop for miles. The fog thinned as the sky began to lighten, gray shifting toward a dull blue. I passed an old wooden sign, half buried in snow, "Welcome to Lutzen Township," and realized I'd been heading west, back toward civilization. Relief came in waves, but underneath it was something else. A question I couldn't shake. How did it know my name? I made it to a small gas station by mid-morning. The clerk, a woman maybe in her 50s, looked surprised to see me pull up. "You're the first person I've seen all week," she said. "Road's been empty." I nodded, still shaking, still trying to keep my voice even. "You ever hear of the North Lights Motel, about 30 miles east of here?" Her smile faded. "North Lights?" She paused. "That place burned down in '89. Nothing left but a foundation and a couple old signs. Why?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, my body suddenly cold again even though the sun had started to rise. That night, I didn't sleep in the van. I parked behind a diner, kept the lights on, and sat with a cup of coffee until sunrise. Every creak, every gust of wind made me flinch. I thought maybe it was over, that it had been some kind of hallucination born from exhaustion and isolation. But 2 nights later, parked at a quiet campground near Grand Marais, I heard it again. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. This time, though, it wasn't on the window. It was inside the van, somewhere in the cabinets. I froze, eyes locked on the kitchenette where I kept my stove and dishes. The sound came again, soft, patient, like someone trapped and waiting. I opened the cabinet slowly, heart pounding, nothing. Just my plates, a tin of coffee, and a folded map. When I pulled the map out, I saw something on the back of it, a faint imprint, like a watermark pressed into the paper. 5 small circles the size of fingertips. That was when I stopped trying to explain it. The days that followed felt off balance. Even in daylight, the woods around the campgrounds felt heavy. Birds went quiet when I stepped outside. My own reflection in the van's window looked unfamiliar. Pale, sleepless, older somehow. I drove south, telling myself I'd leave the north behind. But the farther I went, the more I realized something had changed inside the van itself. Sometimes when I turned on the headlights, I'd see frost forming on the inside of the windshield, even in the middle of the day. Other times I'd hear faint tapping from the roof, like rain that wasn't there. Once, while driving through Wisconsin, I saw a reflection in my rearview mirror. Not of another car, but of a motel sign glowing faintly red through the mist. It said North Lights. There was nothing behind me. That night, I pulled off near a rest stop, too tired to go on. I parked beneath a streetlight, trying to convince myself I was safe. The light flickered, dimmed, then steadied. I lay down in the back, wrapped in my sleeping bag, listening to the hum of trucks on the highway. And then, faintly, just beyond sleep, came a voice. "You never checked out." It was whisper thin, like breath against my ear. My body went rigid, every muscle locked. I sat up fast. Nothing there, no one outside. But in the condensation on the inside of the rear window, 5 fingerprints slowly appeared, pressed from the inside out. I wiped them away, but they always came back. By morning, I was driving again, heading nowhere in particular. I stopped talking to people about it. No one would believe me anyway. But I started noticing others on the road, other campers, other Volkswagen vans that looked just like mine. Old, faded, sun-worn, traveling the same lonely highways. Sometimes we'd pass each other and nod, the silent recognition of wanderers. But sometimes, when I looked closer, I swore I saw the same person in the driver's seat every time. The same pale eyes, the same fixed stare. Now when the nights are long and the fog creeps low, I hear it again. The knocking, the rhythm that's carved itself into my bones. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. I still drive. I still camp. But I never stay in motels anymore, and when the fog gets thick, I pull off the road, kill the engine, and whisper into the dark. I hear you. I know you're there. Sometimes, if the night is quiet enough, the knocking stops for a while, like it's listening, like it remembers. I used to think the road was freedom. That was why I bought the van in the first place, not just to travel, but to outrun something. The feeling that every job, every city, every version of my life before this had been closing in. The Volkswagen was supposed to be escape. But now I realize the road doesn't set you free. It just strips you down until you can't hide from what's following you. By the time I crossed into Michigan's Upper Peninsula, I hadn't slept properly in days. The knocking had become part of the background noise. Sometimes it came from the windows, sometimes the walls, sometimes even beneath the floorboards. Always that same rhythm. 3, pause, 2. It no longer startled me. It just reminded me that I wasn't alone. I kept driving north, following the Lake Superior shoreline. There's something about that lake, the way it swallows sound, the way the horizon disappears into mist. The locals call it a living thing, and they're not wrong. At night, it looks more like an ocean than a lake, black water stretching forever. I stopped near a campground outside Marquette, where the trees bent in from the wind, and the air carried the smell of wet cedar. I parked facing the water. I told myself I'd only stay one night, but when I turned off the headlights, the reflection of the van glowed faintly in the dark window. And behind my reflection, for just a second, I saw movement. Someone sitting in the passenger seat, a pale outline like frost catching the light. I turned fast, and of course, no one was there. I don't remember falling asleep that night. I just remember the dream. I was back at the North Lights Motel, standing outside room 6. The door was open, and the room inside looked the same. The flickering light, the hum of the heater, the smell of damp pine. Only this time there was someone sitting on the bed. The same old man from the office, only he looked different, younger. His eyes were the same, though, white-blue, sharp, fixed on me. He said, "You shouldn't have answered." And then the floor under me split like ice. I woke up gasping, sweat freezing on my skin. The van was silent, the lake a mirror of fog. I sat there in the dark, trying to catch my breath. Then I saw it again, fingerprints on the inside of the windshield. 5, pressed into the condensation, slowly trailing down like a hand sliding off glass. That was when I knew I had to end it. There are places up north where people say the world feels thinner, where the distance between what's real and what isn't starts to blur. I drove toward one of those places, following an unmarked road the locals had mentioned once. They said it led to an old overlook that used to be part of a resort before the fires, before the motel. I didn't even question how I remembered that conversation. I just drove like something was pulling me there. The trees grew denser the farther I went, and the fog thickened again, curling in the headlights. My hands were trembling on the wheel, not from fear anymore, but from fatigue, from carrying this thing too long. The knocking had gone quiet, but that was worse. Silence meant it was waiting. When I reached the end of the road, the forest opened to a cliff edge overlooking the lake. The water below was motionless, like glass reflecting the faint shimmer of the aurora above. The northern lights, faint and ghostly green, stretching across the sky. The air was electric. It made my hair stand on end. I killed the engine and stepped out. The cold hit like a wall, but it felt clean. The lights above shimmered, twisting and pulsing in silence. For a moment, it was beautiful, the kind of beauty that feels ancient, untouchable. And then, faintly beneath the sound of wind, I heard it. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. This time it wasn't on the van, it was coming from the trees. I turned slowly, flashlight shaking in my hand. The beam caught only fog and branches. The knocking came again, closer now, circling me. I backed toward the cliff's edge without realizing it. My breath came out in clouds. I wanted to yell, to tell it to stop, to ask what it wanted, but the words caught in my throat. Then, from the darkness, I saw him, the old man, the same one from the motel, walking slowly toward me, his eyes glinting white in the beam. "You shouldn't have answered," he said again. His voice was calm, almost kind. "It can't leave once you let it in." My mind was racing. "What do you mean?" I shouted. "What is it?" He didn't move closer. "It's been here longer than us. It knocks, and someone answers. You did." He looked past me toward the van. "You should go now." The wind shifted, carrying his voice away. I turned back toward the lake, and when I looked again, he was gone. No footprints in the frost, no sound in the trees, just silence. I don't know how long I stood there before getting back into the van. My fingers were numb, my thoughts scattered. I started the engine, the headlights cutting through the fog, and there, in front of me, was the sign, North Lights Motel. The same cracked neon, the same pulse of red, but I wasn't in a town. I was miles deep in the woods. I hit the gas, driving straight through it. The sign shattered into the mist like it was made of light. For a moment, the world went white, blinding, electric, and then everything went dark. When I came to, the sun was rising over the lake. The van sat at the overlook, silent. No fog, no sign, no sound, just stillness. For the first time in months, the windows were clear. No fingerprints, no frost, just me. I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whatever that thing was had finally let me go. But a few days later, while driving south along the highway, I stopped at a diner near Duluth. A man in a trucker cap sat 2 stools down, nursing a coffee. When I paid my bill, he glanced up at me and said, "You the one with the old Volkswagen?" "Yeah," I said, surprised. "How'd you know?" He smiled faintly. "Saw it out front. Used to have one like it. Drove it up north once, years ago. There's a place up there, can't remember the name. Something with lights." "North Lights Motel?" I asked. His eyes flicked up, wide. "Yeah, that's it. You've been there?" I didn't answer. He leaned closer. "I stayed there one night, heard knocking on the window. Thought it was a joke. Opened it. Next morning, my van was covered in frost. Middle of July." He paused, his voice dropping. "Never drove north again." Outside, I could see my Volkswagen parked under the sun. The glass gleamed. But as I walked toward it, I noticed something faint on the windshield, 5 prints fading as the light touched them. That was when I understood. It wasn't the motel that haunted me, it was the road, the space between places, the silence that waits for travelers who don't know when to stop. Now, every time I drive, I keep my window rolled up and the radio playing low, just enough to drown out the sound. But some nights when the static fades and the wind dies, I still hear it, that rhythm that feels like memory. 3 knocks, pause, 2. And I remember the old man's words, soft and certain, echoing from somewhere far north where the sky burns green and the roads disappear into mist. You shouldn't have answered. But I did, and now the road never ends. Sometimes I wonder if the road remembers us, the way it bends toward our mistakes, the way it seems to whisper the names of the places we should have never gone back to. There are nights when I catch myself driving without destination, guided by muscle memory and some invisible pull, only to realize I've been heading north again, toward where it all began, toward the motel that shouldn't exist. The Volkswagen's old engine hums like a living thing beneath me. That steady rhythm I once found comforting now feels like breath, labored, uneven. I've replaced nearly every part in that van over the years, but there's one sound that won't go away. From inside the cabin, beneath the paneling, comes a faint knocking. It's slower now, softer, like it's grown tired, or maybe like it's waiting for me to be. When you live on the road long enough, you stop seeing the difference between here and there, between this town and the last, between the past and what you still carry with you. It all becomes one long stretch of asphalt, lined with trees and memories you try not to remember. And somewhere along that stretch, I think the world thins just enough for something else to step through. It's been years since that winter night. I've driven thousands of miles, through deserts and mountains, along coastal highways and forgotten county roads. I've camped by rivers that no longer show up on maps, woken to snow that wasn't in the forecast. I tell myself I'm free, that I can stop whenever I want, but I never do. The van keeps moving like it has somewhere it needs to go. Sometimes when I pull off to rest, I meet other travelers, young couples in sprinter vans, old men in converted buses, kids chasing that same feeling of escape I once chased. They talk about the beauty of the open road, about freedom and the stars, about the quiet. I listen, smile, nod. But I don't tell them what the quiet really sounds like after midnight, when the fog rolls in and the air feels heavy enough to hold breath that isn't yours. One night, just outside of Idaho, I parked at a small rest stop overlooking a dry lake bed. The stars were out, clear, cold, endless. For once, the world felt peaceful. I brewed coffee on my small stove, opened the side door, and sat watching the horizon. That's when I heard the engine start to hum on its own. Faint, low, like it was idling even though I hadn't turned the key. I leaned forward, hand on the wheel, and realized it wasn't the engine. It was coming from the radio. The static shifted, forming a faint pattern beneath the noise. Then through the static came that rhythm. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. It didn't come from outside anymore. It was in the sound. In the air. I didn't move. I just sat there, coffee cooling in my hands, listening to that rhythm fade and return like waves on the shore. And then, under it, came a voice I hadn't heard in years. You never checked out. The words came like breath through a cracked door. My chest went cold, my hands started to shake, and before I could stop myself, I whispered, "What do you want?" The static went silent. The whole van seemed to hold its breath. Then, through the quiet, came the faintest reply. "You." The radio shut off. Everything went dark. The stars outside blinked out, swallowed by a cloud that rolled in faster than weather should move. I could feel the van tremble slightly, the air turning sharp, metallic. My reflection in the windshield stared back at me, but my mouth wasn't moving. The reflection smiled. I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe I didn't. When dawn came, the fog was gone, the stars forgotten. The van was parked exactly where it had been, untouched, except for one thing. The windshield had frost on the inside, and drawn into it with a single fingertip were the words, Room 6. I sat there for a long time, engine running, waiting for the sun to burn it away. It never did. I wiped it clean, but hours later, when I stopped for gas, it was back, faint but clear. I realized then that the motel was never a place. It was an invitation, a door. Once you open it, it follows you. It takes shape in whatever you drive, wherever you go. It becomes the silence between the knocks. Sometimes I think about going back north, about finding what's left of that land and burning it to ash. But I know that's not how it works. You can't destroy something that lives in the empty spaces, in the frost, in the silence, in the reflection that lingers a second too long. So I drive, always south when winter comes, always away from the cold, but the road loops on itself. The same trees, the same sky, the same empty motel signs flickering at the edge of nowhere. And every time I see one glow red against the fog, I swear it spells out the same two words: North Lights. Maybe one day I'll pull over again. Maybe I'll stop fighting it. The road feels longer now, heavier. Some nights I catch my reflection in the rear view, and for a split second I see frost blooming at the corners of my eyes. I'm starting to think the knocking isn't coming from outside anymore. I think it's the sound of something inside me, asking to be let out. When that day comes, when the knocking stops and the frost no longer fades, I'll drive north one last time. Back through the fog, past the old roads, until I find that place where the lights shimmer and the world ends quietly. And maybe there, at the edge of it all, I'll check in again. Not because I have to, but because the road has been calling for too long to pretend I'm not listening. Until then, I keep the heater low, the radio silent, and my hand on the wheel. The frost creeps slowly down the glass each night, drawing faint shapes in the dark. 5 fingers, 3 knocks, pause, 2. The rhythm never really stops, it just waits. In the hum of the tires, in the hush between miles, in the breath that hangs in the cold air before dawn. And if you're ever driving north, alone, past where the map ends, and you see the glow of an old neon sign through the mist, don't stop. Don't check in, because once you do, the road won't ever let you go. I used to think the woods only scared people who didn't know better. My name is Evan, I'm 34 years old, and I've spent most of my life chasing quiet places. The kind where the trees drown out highway noise, and you can pretend the world isn't spinning itself apart. I grew up in Washington State, and by now the Pacific Northwest feels like an extension of my bones. The mist that clings to your jacket, the moss that tries to pull every lonely thing back into the dirt, the silence that settles so thick on your shoulders that you forget it's even there. After too many years grinding through jobs that left me feeling emptied out, I bought an older Class C RV, white paint peeling, cabinets that rattled like loose teeth, and decided the road was where I'd rebuild myself. My plan was simple: explore the remote corners of the Pacific Northwest, film it for my small YouTube channel, and prove that solitude could still be beautiful. But solitude out here has teeth and patience. That's something no one tells you when you first start wandering deeper into the wilderness. The Pacific Northwest has a reputation for mystery, fog rolling like a living animal, forests older than recorded memory, and trails that seem to rearrange themselves after sundown. The locals pass around stories quietly over bar counters or by fire pits. People who wandered off for a bathroom break and never returned, hikers seen waving from the ridge only to vanish into clouds, tents left zipped from the inside with breakfast still cooking on the fire. Everyone knows someone who's missing someone. I told myself those were just stories, that fear is a choice, that most disappearances were tragic but explainable. Bear attacks, falls, hypothermia, disorientation. Nature doesn't care about your sense of direction, but denial is a warm blanket, and I wrap myself in it tight. It was late September when I set out on the trip that changed everything. I was chasing the edge of autumn, those weeks where the air smells sharp, the leaves bleed rust red and amber, and the tourists thin out enough to leave you alone with your thoughts. I was headed into the Olympic Peninsula, toward a stretch of land people around here call the Gray Mile. Not because it's measured, but because fog hangs there like a curtain no matter the season. The forests grow thicker, older, stranger. The mountains vanish into clouds even on sunshine days, and the deeper you go, the more the world seems to forget you exist. Perfect for filming, perfect for quiet, perfect for pretending I didn't have the kind of past that wakes you up at night, lungs full of ice. I wasn't running from anything, at least that's what I told myself. The campground wasn't on any official map. I learned about it from a retired ranger who lived near Lake Crescent, a man with lines on his face like carved bark. He told me there was an old logging road, barely drivable, that led to a clearing where RVs used to park back in the early 90s before funding disappeared and nature swallowed it back up. He said the place didn't have a name anymore, but the stars looked good there. I didn't notice the way his voice tightened until later. He handed me a folded piece of paper with landmarks drawn in ballpoint. When I thanked him, he hesitated and asked if I was traveling alone. I said yes, and he muttered something under his breath that I didn't catch. It took nearly 2 hours to navigate the road. The pines and spruce closed in so tightly on both sides that it felt like a throat narrowing around me. My tires kept slipping in the mud and gravel, the RV's suspension groaning with every pothole. Twice I considered turning around. Twice I convinced myself that discomfort was part of the adventure. When the forest finally spat me out, I found a wide clearing, surrounded by trees so tall they made the sky look small. But on the far edge, where the forest thickened again, there was something else. An old, rusted Airstream trailer. It slouched on flat tires, windows smeared opaque with grime. It looked abandoned, left to rot like a forgotten memory. A faint chill traveled from my spine to my fingertips. Still, I parked my RV on the opposite side, wanting distance. There were no license plates on the Airstream, no footprints, no chairs, no fire pit, just a door barely cracked open as if waiting for someone to come back. I told myself plenty of campers leave old rigs behind. Maybe the ground softened and they couldn't tow it out. Maybe they pawned the title and walked away. But the truth is, I didn't want to think about the other possibilities. The sun slipped behind the clouds faster than I expected, and before long, the clearing was drenched in blue-gray dusk. I set up quickly, leveled the RV, stretched my sore legs, lit my propane stove. But I noticed the silence more than anything else. No wind through the branches. No birds giving their last cries of daylight. Nothing. A silence so complete it felt curated. I tried to record an intro for the channel, talking about the freedom of the open road and the beauty of the Pacific Northwest. But my voice sounded small, insincere, like I was pretending to be brave. That night after dinner, I heard the first sound, a knock. Not on my RV, but somewhere out in the clearing. A single solid tap, like knuckles against wood. I paused, held my breath. It came again, softer this time. I told myself it had to be a branch falling, a bird pecking, a pine cone dropping. But the sound repeated, 3 measured knocks, and every time the space between them grew shorter. The air seemed to tighten around me. My instincts argued with reason. My brain wanted to explain it away. My gut wanted me to leave. I stepped outside with a flashlight. The beam carved thin pathways through the dark, but dissolved before reaching the tree line. I swept the light across the clearing, forcing myself not to look at the Airstream until the very end. When the beam finally hit its metal skin, something shifted inside. Just a small movement. A shadow deeper than the others. But undeniable, someone or something was in there. I shut the door to my RV and locked it without realizing I'd moved. I sat on the bed, flashlight in one hand, the other gripping the handle of a flimsy utility knife I kept for repairs. The knocks had stopped, but that somehow made it worse. Hours passed. The silence deepened, and exhaustion finally smothered the adrenaline. I collapsed into sleep with the lights still on. But dreams out here don't feel like dreams. I saw trees stretching taller than possible, narrowing into silhouettes like people standing shoulder to shoulder. I heard voices weaving through the branches, faint, overlapping, like everyone whispering their last words at once. Then I saw myself. standing in the center of the clearing, frozen as dozens of figures stepped out from between the trunks. Their faces were blurred, sliding in and out of shape, but their eyes, God, their eyes were wide open. They were looking past me, toward the airstream, and then they pointed. I woke with a scream lodged in my throat, sweat freezing on my skin, heart battering against my ribs. The lights flickered. Something heavy dragged across the outside of my RV, slow, scraping, like fingers drawn along the metal. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. Outside, the fog had rolled in thick enough to erase the world, and somewhere beyond the haze, people were whispering. Not one voice, not two, a chorus, low, urgent, as if deciding what to do with me. I told myself not to look. As long as I didn't look outside, whatever was out there couldn't truly reach me. But fear has a way of twisting curiosity into a blade that digs inward. I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if something was really circling my home on wheels. I crept to the window above the sink, every step louder than it should have been on the linoleum floor. The whispers outside ebbed and swelled like the tide moving around the edges of the clearing. They weren't close, not right against the RV, but they weren't far either. I eased 2 fingers under the blackout curtain and lifted just enough to see out. Fog pressed against the glass, thick and white, swirling as if stirred by invisible hands. At first I saw nothing, then the faintest movement. A shadow just past the edge of the clearing. It wasn't walking. It wasn't gliding. It was drifting, as if unsure how to stand in its own skin. I shut the curtain so fast it snapped against the wall. My heart hammered. I backed away, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the fog. Fatigue, fear, overactive imagination. But deep down, something older than logic was waking in me. An instinct that whispered, "You are not alone out here." That instinct only got louder when I heard the sound from the airstream, like someone dragging fingertips across metal from the inside. A slow scrape across the wall facing me. Then a long pause. Then 3 soft knocks. The same pattern I'd heard earlier, but now muffled through aluminum. I stayed awake until the sun finally rose, the fog burning off just enough to show the edges of the trees again. My chest ached with lack of sleep, but daylight gave me borrowed confidence. Nothing bad ever finishes what it starts during the day. That's what I told myself. I stepped outside with a shaky breath. The morning air tasted damp and metallic, almost like blood when you've bitten your lip. I walked the perimeter of the RV, pretending to check the tires for damage. The truth? I was searching for footprints. There were none. The ground was soft enough from recent rain that anything heavier than a rabbit should have left a mark. But there was only my own tread from yesterday. The airstream sat hunched in the same posture of abandonment as before. But the door was now closed. Last night I had seen it open. A reasonable person would have left immediately, packed up and barreled the RV back over that terrible road. But fear does something strange. It makes you want clarity. You want to prove to yourself more than anyone that you're not embattled and still makes sense. So I walked toward the airstream. The mud sucked against my boots, grip tightening with every step. The metal skin of the trailer had corroded into streaks the color of dried tears. I reached the door and placed my hand flat against it. Cold. Too cold for daylight. I knocked. 3 times. Nothing answered. But when I leaned in, I smelled something. Stale air, mold, and beneath that, something like old sweat. A human scent. The kind that only comes from someone who hasn't stepped outside in far, far too long. My hand drifted to the handle. A tremor ran through me. Half of me wanted to open it. The other half knew better. Before I could make the choice, a voice broke the silence behind me. Don't. I spun so fast I nearly slipped in the mud. A man stood 20 feet away, hands raised like he approached a spooked animal. He looked like he'd been carved from the forest itself, flannel shirt frayed at the cuffs, gray beard tangled, eyes bloodshot but sharp. A hunting rifle hung from a sling over his shoulder, though he didn't point it at me. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said. "Name's Carl. I saw your rig last night." "Were you the one knocking?" I asked before thinking. My voice sounded thinner than I wanted. He shook his head. No, but I heard it too. That didn't make me feel better. He walked closer, boots sinking into the clearing. You shouldn't open that. Folks who go near that trailer tend not to leave. A cold spike slid beneath my ribs. What do you mean? He sighed, looking toward the trees as he spoke. Family came through here a few years ago, parked a fifth wheel close to that thing. He jerked his chin toward the airstream. Wife went missing the first night. Husband said she was just going out to grab something from the truck. He stepped inside. She never came back. What happened to him? I asked. Carl's jaw tightened. Went looking. I found their campsite a day later. Fire still burning. Kid asleep in the trailer. Husband gone. No sign of either of them, scratched, except a record of their names on a missing persons report. I looked again at the airstream, dread wrapping around me like a constrictor. Police couldn't find anything? In these woods, he huffed a laugh, but there was no humor in it. They can spend a month searching and never be in the right place. Something moved in the shadows between the pines, just a flicker. Enough to make Carl glance over his shoulder. His voice dropped. There are places out here older than God, he murmured, places that want to stay hidden, and they take offense when we try to hold them still with names on maps. I swallowed hard. Why are you camping this close then? Carl gave me a grim look. I'm not camping for you. My pulse stuttered. Me? He nodded. Saw your tracks on the road. Figured you didn't know the stories and you don't look like you've got enough fear in you to leave when you should. I bristled. I'm not scared. Good. He cut me off sharply. Fear makes people run. Ignorance makes them explore. And out here exploring gets you taken. The wind shifted, bringing with it a faint smell, sweet, sour, decaying. The same smell I'd caught near the airstream. Carl's eyes narrowed. Sun's out. That means we've got time. Pack your things. I'll take you somewhere safer. I wanted to say yes. God, every sensible cell in my body screamed to say yes. But fear wasn't the only force working on me now. Curiosity dug its claws in deeper, and pride whispered that leaving would make me a coward, that maybe none of this was real, that I needed proof. Maybe we should just take a quick look inside, I said, gesturing toward the door. Carl stepped forward, blocking my path with one heavy arm. The look he gave me was pure, unfiltered warning. Boy, he said quietly, if you open that door, you'll stop being someone I can save. Silence, heavy as oak. Something rustled inside the airstream, directly behind the metal wall, like a shuffle of feet too slow to be alive. Carl's breath hitched, his hand moved toward the rifle strap. You hear that? Before I could respond, a voice floated through the thin wall. Not a whisper, not a growl, a voice, a woman's, smooth, calm, and terribly wrong. Help me. The plea hung in the air like a trap. My stomach dropped. I stumbled backward, adrenaline turning my blood electric. That's not a person, Carl hissed. They sound like us when they want company. The air temperature plunged as if the sun had blinked out. Fog surged back in, swallowing color, swallowing distance. The trees blurred into towering shadows. Carl grabbed my arm, firm, urgent. We leave, now. But before we could move, we heard it. From the far side of the clearing, more knocks. Not 3 this time. Dozens, hundreds. A rain of knuckles drumming against tree trunks metal the ground itself, as if the whole forest was knocking back. Carl didn't hesitate. He pulled me toward my RV with a force that snapped me out of my trance. We ran through the soupy fog, my breath cutting into my chest like broken glass. Every direction felt wrong, like the clearing was bending around us, stretching thin and warping perspective. The airstream vanished behind a wall of white, but the knocks continued, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. Don't look back, Carl barked. I didn't. I focused on the metallic shape emerging ahead. My RV, my shelter, my ticket out. I fumbled the keys with shaking fingers, finally getting the door open. I nearly dove inside, Carl right behind me. He slammed the door shut and locked both latches. The knocks outside stopped instantly, like the sound had been cut away with scissors. But silence didn't bring relief. Silence meant waiting. What the hell is happening out there? I whispered. Carl pressed his back against the door, listening hard. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to break or run. "They know you're here," he muttered. "They?" My voice cracked like a teenager's. Carl turned his head slowly, eyes drilling into mine. "This forest has more dead among its roots than living wandering its trails. Some bodies nature buries, others nature keeps." I couldn't breathe. "The disappearances," he nodded once. "Some folks walk into the trees and never find their way back. Some get lost in weather. Some get taken by cliffs or rivers or wildlife." He leaned closer. "But some wander into the wrong place, and something old notices them." Something sharp prickled at the back of my neck, a whisper of instinct screaming louder now. "You should have left yesterday." I swallowed hard. "What does it want with me?" Carl's silence was worse than any answer. The RV creaked. A soft weight pressed against the left side, as though someone leaned their full body against the metal skin. Then, a long, slow slide of pressure toward the back. My heart felt like it'd rupture. Is someone out there leaning on the rig? Carl's grip tightened around the rifle strap. "That's just one." "One what?" He didn't answer. Then came the second sound. A tap on the window above my bed. Dainty, almost playful. Tap, tap, tap. I clenched my teeth. "It's just branches," I said, knowing it wasn't. Carl shook his head. "Branches don't tap in rhythms." The tapping stopped abruptly. My ears rang with the absence of it. Then, a voice. Close, too close. Evan. A voice I had never heard before, yet it spoke my name with the familiarity of an old friend. It came from the front window. Cold shot down my spine and into the soles of my feet. The voice was soft and feminine, and the way it shaped my name felt hungry. Carl raised the rifle, but didn't aim it at anything specific. "Don't look," he whispered. But like a moth to flame, my head began to turn. Slow, unwilling, drawn by terror's gravity. The fog outside swirled. For a heartbeat, I saw a shape pressed to the glass, a face. Pale skin, wet hair, eyes too wide, mouth neither smiling nor frowning, just open slightly, expectantly. Then it was inches away from me, so close I saw condensation bloom against the glass from its non-existent breath. "Help me, Evan." My body refused to obey. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, could only stare as the eyes blinked too slowly, like lids dragged through mud. Carl yanked me away so roughly I crashed into the counter. My shoulder exploded with pain, but shock numbed most of it. "What did I tell you?" he snapped. "It sees you when you look." I didn't mean." He crouched, gripping my shoulders. "That's how they get in. They get in. They learn your face, your voice, your soul." His voice dropped to a fierce whisper. "We leave right now." I nodded, trembling. "The road?" "I'll lead," he said. "Engine on. Stay right behind me. If you fall behind." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I scrambled into the driver's seat. My hands shook so violently I fumbled the keys again. The ignition clicked once, twice. On the third try, the engine caught with a groan. Carl slung the rifle and jogged into the fog. I followed the red glow of his taillight through the windshield. The RV lurched forward. I just needed to stay close to him. That was my lifeline. But the fog was alive. Shapes flickered at the corners of my headlights. Figures too tall to be human, limbs bending wrong, movements stuttered like broken film reels. Every time I blinked, they vanished. Every time I exhaled, they reappeared. Carl's truck turned sharply onto the logging road. I followed, tires skidding in the mud. Branches clawed at the windows as if trying to pull me back. Halfway down the road, my headlights caught something ahead, something that made my blood freeze. Another RV sitting sideways, blocking the path. A Class A, newer than mine. Headlights off, windows dark. Carl slowed and opened his door, waving urgently for me to stay put as he approached the vehicle. But I already knew what he'd find. A chill threaded into my gut, tightening like a noose. The RV's passenger door was wide open. The steps were down. The mud was full of boot prints leading away from the vehicle, and then abruptly stopping. Abruptly. No return path. The forest had swallowed whoever was inside. Carl peered in, then backed away fast. Even through the windshield, I saw fear stretch across his features. He ran back to his truck, but instead of climbing in, he sprinted toward my RV. He flung the passenger door open and climbed inside, slamming it behind him. "Move," What happened? I choked. He stared dead ahead, voice tight. There's a half-eaten meal still sitting on the table. That shouldn't have been the worst part, but it was what he said next that cracked something in me. And the TV's still on. I pressed the gas, wheels spinning before catching traction. Carl kept his eyes locked forward, jaw clenched, knuckles white. What if the road's blocked further down? I asked. His answer was a whisper. Then we don't stop moving. Branches scraped the roof, each one a reminder something was above us. Following. Listening. 5 more minutes. 10. My sense of time fractured. Fear does that. It stretches seconds into hours and compresses hours into a blink. Eventually, the trees thinned. The fog receded like a retreating tide. We burst into a patch of overcast daylight, and the world felt breathable again. Only then did I pull over, chest heaving. Carl exhaled like he'd been drowning. Then he turned to me with haunted eyes. "You got marked," he said. The words struck like a punch. What does that mean?" "It means they noticed you," he said, "and once they notice you, they don't forget. Not ever." My throat felt too tight to speak. I managed one broken word. "Why?" Carl studied me for a long moment. "Because you listened to the knocking. Because you looked when it called your name." He hesitated before continuing. "And because you're exactly the kind they take." The clouds overhead seemed to darken at the edges, as if the forest far behind us was exhaling. "What kind is that?" I asked. Carl's expression softened, almost pitying. "Lonely," he said. The word clung to me like a burr, irritating and undeniable. I wanted to deny it, to laugh, to argue, but the protest curdled in my throat. Carl didn't push. He knew the truth had already welded itself to my ribs. We sat in silence for a moment while the engine idled. The forest behind us seemed to stare, waiting for us to make the next move. I stared at the fog-shrouded road stretching ahead, promising safety but offering no guarantees. Carl finally spoke. "We need to get further. They'll follow the road first, least resistance. We put distance between us and that clearing before night." Night. My pulse quickened. Darkness wasn't just darkness anymore. It felt like a closing mouth. I took the wheel again, and we drove with his truck leading, navigating twist after twist of road through dense woods. No conversation, just the steady hum of tires and an awareness that every tree was a spectator. Only when we emerged onto a wider paved road did Carl signal me to pull into a scenic turnout overlooking a river gorge. I parked and stepped out on stiff legs, needing air, needing space to think. The wind was cold but real. The sun, hidden behind clouds, still meant something out here. That alone steadied me. Carl stood with his back to me, staring at the river rushing below. He looked older now, as if fear had carved years into him overnight. "How long have you known about?" I asked, my voice rough. He didn't turn. Too long. A beat passed. "My brother was the first." A hush fell around us, even the river seeming to lower its voice. He used to hike these woods, loved the silence, thought it meant peace. Carl's jaw flexed. "But silence out here is a predator. It waits, watches, learns you." I swallowed, the wind biting at my eyes. "He went missing on a solo trip. Rangers searched, volunteers. Weeks." Carl shook his head. "Found his pack in perfect condition near a creek. Food untouched, water filter cleaned and ready, like he just set it down and stepped into the air." My skin prickled. "Did they ever find him?" Carl's eyes closed. 2 months later, a group of kids camping up near the ridge swore they saw a man standing between the trees at sunset, shivering, barefoot. He paused. "They said he called for help in a voice that didn't sound like his own." The wind stirred, as if reacting. Carl finally looked at me. "Once you're marked, they don't let you leave. Not completely." A shiver shook me that had nothing to do with the cold. "So what do I do? How do I stop them?" Carl hesitated, too long. Then, "There are places they can't reach as easily. Towns, roads near water. Noise helps. People help." He stepped closer, voice dropping. "But you need to understand, they will find you again. Might be days, might be weeks. They don't rush. The waiting is part of the hunt." I stared at him, disbelief warring with dread. "You expect me to live looking over my shoulder forever?" "I expect you to live," he said simply. "Most never get the chance to run at all." Heat rose behind my eyes, anger and fear entangled. Why me? I didn't do anything. You noticed them. Carl's gaze pierced mine. Most walk past the mouth of the wilderness blind, but some look straight into it. He shrugged, resigned, and the wilderness looks back. Those words echoed through the canyon, or maybe just through me. I couldn't stay stuck in fear. Not here, not forever. I forced a breath. I want to go into town, I said. Maybe the ranger station at Ho. Somewhere with people, cell service. Carl nodded. I'll follow you to the main turn. Then you drive fast, don't stop for anything strange, and don't look into the trees if you hear voices. That's your plan? I snapped. Just avoid them? What do you want? Carl shot back. A gun? They're not animals. A priest? They're not ghosts. They're something older than stories. His shoulders sagged. And if they're paying attention to you now, the best defense is distance. We climbed into our vehicles. My hands trembled on the wheel, but action felt better than stillness. Carl led us down the road, faster now, until the trees thinned and a road sign appeared. Forks, 27 miles. He slowed and pulled over. I rolled to a stop beside him. This is where I leave you, he said through his open window. Take this road. Straight shot to town. You're not coming with me? Someone has to circle back, he said. Make sure they don't use the road. He gave a grim half smile. I've been dancing with them for a long time, son. I know their steps. I felt the sudden weight of being responsible for myself again. Alone again. Carl, I began. Thank you. He nodded once, eyes tired but fierce. If you see the fog get thick all at once, don't wait. Don't think. Drive. Then he revved his truck and turned back toward the forest I'd barely escaped. And I was alone. Just me, the RV, and the long, quiet road. I sat there for a moment, breathing, trying to convince myself I was safe, trying to believe daylight meant victory, trying to ignore the feeling that the trees were listening. Finally, I pulled forward, wheels rolling over asphalt that, thank God, felt solid under me. I drove. 20 minutes ticked by, then 25. Town wasn't far now. The tension in my muscles began to ease. My grip on the wheel loosened. The world felt almost normal. I even turned on the radio just to hear another voice, some late afternoon host talking about fishing conditions along the coast. Mundane, human, perfect. Then, static. A violent, glitching roar of static devoured the signal. I reached to turn the dial. And that's when I saw it. Just ahead, standing at the edge of the tree line, a woman, barefoot, clothes torn. Hair plastered to her skull, her skin a gray pallor that made her look carved from river stones. She stared directly at me as I approached, completely still. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Hitchhiker? Lost hiker? Injured? In shock? But then she smiled, slow, too slow. Her eyes were wrong, huge pupils swallowing the rest. I slowed, shaking my head. No, no. She stepped forward into the road. Her mouth opened, stretching wider and wider until it seemed her jaw might tear. And in a voice that scraped like branches on metal, she spoke. Help me, Evan. My foot slammed the accelerator before the words fully registered. The RV surged, tires squealed. She didn't move. I swerved at the last second, heart screaming that I'd hit her. But when I checked the mirrors, there was no one on the road. No one behind me. No footprints. Nothing. The fog ahead thickened, rolling toward me like a wave. My heartbeat hammered at my ribs. My breath shattered. They'd found me. Faster than Carl expected, the road disappeared into white. I heard knocking, not on the RV. Inside it, the sound traveled along the walls like something searching for a way out, or a way in. Then the whisper returned, closer now, pressed against my ear from the passenger seat. You can run, Evan. You just can't leave. I screamed and kept driving blind into the fog, knowing only one thing for certain. Solitude isn't peaceful in the Pacific Northwest. It's a predator. I drove until my arms trembled and my lungs burned for air, the fog wrapping the world in a suffocating cocoon of white. The road vanished beneath me, swallowed into nothing. Every instinct begged me to stop before I veered into a ditch or off a cliff. But the knocking, God, the knocking, kept traveling along the inside walls of the RV, searching, persistent. Then a sudden burst of sunlight. The fog dropped away as quickly as it came, evaporating into the treetops. My RV burst through into clear daylight like a drowning man breaching the surface. Asphalt lay straight and true ahead, freshly painted lines reflecting bright in the afternoon sun. Behind me, the white wall of fog clung stubbornly to the horizon, as if marking the boundary of something's territory. My knuckles loosened their chokehold on the wheel. My chest heaved in desperate, uneven breaths. The radio crackled back to life, the fishing report sliding into a classic rock song like nothing had happened. But the shaking in my hands told me everything had. Town appeared before I knew it. Forks isn't large, just a few main streets stitched together by necessity and memory. Roofs were dotted with moss, paint faded by rain. Life moved here slowly, predictably, humanly, exactly what I needed. I turned into the parking lot of a diner called River's Edge, the neon sign flickering but valiantly lit. The lot wasn't full, but there were enough trucks and SUVs to make me feel like the world wasn't threatening to collapse under my feet. I parked, rested my forehead on the steering wheel, and let out a thin, shaky breath. Inside these walls, I wasn't a target. Not yet. I stepped out into crisp air. Gravel crunched under my boots. The smell of grilled onions and coffee cut through the lingering metallic scent of fear. I clung to that. Inside, warmth greeted me like a hug I didn't know I needed. A waitress with silver hair and kind but tired eyes asked if I wanted a booth or counter. I chose a booth by the window, needing to see the sky unobstructed, needing to see if the fog dared follow. I ordered coffee, black, burning hot. My hands wrapped around the mug like it was anchoring me to reality. The diner atmosphere helped, the clatter of plates, the low hum of conversation, a group of loggers in jackets dusted with sawdust laughing over breakfast for lunch. Normalcy, sanity, safety. And then the door chime rang. I didn't want to look. I told myself it was just another local coming in for a meal, and that focusing on anything else would only pull me back into fear. But some instinct, the same one that dragged me out of sleep in that clearing, pulled my gaze up. It was Carl. I felt relief hit me so hard I nearly knocked over my cup. He scanned the room, eyes landing on me with visible release. He slid into the seat across from me. "You got here fast," he said quietly. I didn't stop. My voice still quivered. "They followed." He grimaced. I could feel the air shift when they moved off the road, like a storm passing through bone. The waitress refilled my cup without asking and poured Carl one too. She left without comment, maybe sensing something tense in our corner. "You said they can't come into places like this," I whispered. "We're safe, right?" Carl leaned in closer. "Safe isn't permanent. Safe is a pause." He took a slow sip of coffee. "But yes, for now." His calm steadied me. A little. "Tell me what they are," I said. "I need to understand." Carl looked out the window, scanning the sky as if choosing his words from cloud shapes. "They're not ghosts," he said. "Dead people don't knock." He paused. "They're not animals either. Animals don't steal names," I swallowed. "Names? They learn you," he said. "Once they have your name and voice, you belong to their world as much as ours." He tapped the table twice. "A habit. A signal. They used to be people. A long time ago, whole communities lost to the woods." I couldn't wrap my brain around it. How does that happen? "The land changes them." His eyes darkened, "and they return the favor." Before I could respond, movement outside caught my eye. Fog rolled down the far end of the street, not drifting in lazily from the coast, not creeping from low ground. It poured straight down the center of the road like a silent army advancing. Carl tensed, fingers curling around the coffee mug. "Not yet," he whispered. "It's too fast." The fog swallowed a stop sign, a mailbox, the front of the hardware store. People inside the diner noticed too. Conversations quieted, heads turned. Forks hovered midair. The waitress muttered, "Weather wasn't supposed to change today." Carl stood. Urgency sharpened his voice. "Time to go." "We can't just leave," I said. "There are people here." "There will always be people," he replied darkly. "Right now, they want you." That shattered me. The idea that their hunger wasn't random, that I was the target, sent panic clawing up my throat. Carl pulled out a folded map, drawing a shaky line with his finger. There's a place inland, a ranger cabin near Lake Quinault. Old foundation, lots of iron in the bedrock. Iron confuses them, keeps them from crossing easily. Then take me there, I said, voice breaking. He nodded. We leave now. But just as we turned to go, the diner lights flickered. One blink. Two. Then every bulb in the room went out. Darkness swallowed the space. Someone gasped. Someone else cursed. Then, knocking. Not gentle, not rhythmic, frenzied, on every window at once. A chorus of fists pounding, demanding entry. People screamed. Chairs scraped. Glass rattled in its frame like it might give. Carl grabbed my arm. Kitchen exit. Now! We barreled through the swinging door into the back. Stainless steel counters gleamed under emergency lights that flickered like they might die too. We pushed past a startled cook, threw open the rear exit, and ran into the gravel alley behind the diner. The fog was thicker here. Tendrils snaked in across the pavement like searching fingers. The air smelled sweet and rotten. Carl pointed, "Your RV, get in it." We sprinted. I hit the remote door lock, but my hands were slick with sweat, clumsy. The passenger door refused to open until the third try. Carl shoved me inside and climbed in after me. I jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Praise every god of combustion. The knocking followed. On the back of the RV, on the roof, on the sealed windows. Carl yelled, "Drive! Drive now!" I floored it. Tires spun, gravel skittering like hail. Then we caught traction and launched forward onto the road. The fog chased us. I didn't look back. Couldn't. But I heard the sound of something scraping along the roof, like fingers trying to peel the metal away. "Faster!" Carl yelled. "I'm going as fast as this thing will go," I shouted back. We burst through the outskirts of town. The last building vanished in the mirrors. The forest walls closed in again, but the fog thinned slightly. The knocking softened. The monstrous proximity began to slip just out of reach. My breath shook. Tears blurred my vision. Carl stared ahead like iron forged into human shape. "You're still alive," he said. "That's what matters." "But for how long?" I whispered. He didn't answer. The road curved, rising toward the mountains. Evening lurked on the horizon, shadows lengthening. Night would come soon, and I knew darkness belonged to them. If I stopped driving, if I let the fear freeze me, if I dared to sleep, they would finish what they started. They would take me the way they took the others. Because the Pacific Northwest does not just swallow the lonely, it makes them part of itself. We drove until the last light of day bled away behind the ridges, until the trees were only shapes and the sky a bruised, starless lid. Each mile felt like a tightening rope around my sanity. Every glance at the side mirror showed the forest pressing closer, darker, like it had decided the road belonged to it alone. Carl guided me through an unmarked turn, just a gap between ferns that looked like no road should exist there, yet the tires found gravel, then dirt, then a winding path that snaked deeper into shadow. The branches overhead knitted together, sealing us off from the night sky. "Almost there," Carl said, though his voice carried none of the confidence those words should hold. Finally, the path widened into a clearing, a small gravel pad beside the black mirror of Lake Quinault. And tucked near the tree line, half reclaimed by moss and undergrowth, stood the ranger cabin. The window shutters hung crooked, and a metal antenna lay broken across the roof like a snapped bone. But it was shelter, and iron-rich bedrock beneath us meant the entities would have to fight harder to breach this place. I parked, engine sputtering to a halt. Silence washed over us, no knocking, no whispers, just the cold stillness of wilderness holding its breath. Carl stepped out first, scanning the perimeter. I followed, legs wobbling like they had forgotten how to stand. The air here was different, strangely warm, like the forest exhaled heat instead of oxygen. He fished in his coat pocket, pulled out a heavy iron key, and jammed it into the door lock. With a grunt, it popped open. The hinges screamed but yielded. "Inside," he said. "We secure the windows. We light the fireplace. We don't answer anything that calls your name." He looked directly into my eyes. "Especially if it sounds like someone you love." A tremor rolled through me. I nodded. Inside, the cabin smelled of old cedar and damp stone. A wood stove crouched in the corner, a stack of logs beside it, like soldiers waiting for orders. Carl went to work without delay, barred the door, checked the shutters, made sure no cracks exposed us to the outside world. I helped, though my hands fumbled from exhaustion and panic. When the fire finally caught, warm orange light spilled over the room, turning fear from a scream into a whisper. For the first time in hours, my body remembered how to breathe deeply. Carl sat across from me at a rough wooden table. His beard caught the firelight, eyes reflecting flames that looked older than both of us. "You need to hear this," he said. "If they come back, and they will, you can't collapse into the fear. Fear feeds them. It marks the path to your mind." I swallowed hard. "How do you know all this?" He stared into the flames, expression hollowing. "Because once it was me they wanted." He told me about his brother, the search, the sightings, the nights where he swore he heard his name in the wind. But what he didn't tell me until now was the detail that silenced all thought in me. "I looked for him," he said, "every night for weeks, and then I found him." I leaned forward, pulse thrumming. He was standing on the old bridge near Ho River, barefoot, shivering, eyes wide, like he remembered me but couldn't remember himself. Carl's fingertip traced the table grain, slow and shaking. I ran to him, hugged him. I told him we'd go home. His voice cracked on the syllable of home. The fire popped. But then he smiled and he whispered a question in my ear. Carl looked up and his face was a roadmap of pain. He asked if I remembered dying. Ice stabbed through my veins. Carl dragged a trembling hand down his beard. I shoved him away. The thing wearing my brother didn't fall like a person. It hit the ground like a sack of wet leaves, then just crawled back into the dark. He clenched a fist. I learned the rules after that. I sat frozen, breath shallow, realizing Carl had spent his life trying to keep others from repeating his grief. "What happens if they take me?" I asked quietly. His gaze met mine, and there was nothing soft in it now. Only truth, only scars. "You become the next voice at the window." The room tightened around me. The fire suddenly too hot. I pushed back from the table, pacing. My mind clawed through possibilities, hope trying to surface like a drowning swimmer. "There has to be a way to stop them," I said, "to break the mark." He shook his head slowly. "The mark isn't a curse. It's a claim." The cabin walls creaked. The fire flickered low, though the logs hadn't burned down yet. Carl stood. "It's starting." A low hum vibrated through the foundation, like a distant generator coming to life underground. My skin prickled. "It's just the wind," I lied. Carl's eyes hardened. "There is no wind." The hum grew, became a murmur, became voices. My name surfaced among them. Evan. 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 The sound moved along the walls, pressed against the shutter slats, slid through the chimney brick like smoke. The fire sputtered, flames bending sideways as if recoiling. Carl grabbed an iron poker from the hearth, one of the few things that still made him feel armed. "They can't come in by force," he said. "They can only come in if you answer, if you believe the lie that they are someone familiar." Another voice rose above the rest, softer, desperate, a voice I hadn't heard in years. My sister. The sister I lost in a car accident when I was 18. "Evan, please." My throat closed. I stumbled toward the door before realizing what my body was doing. Carl intercepted, slamming his shoulder into me to keep me back. "That's not her!" he snapped, but grief is a cruel puppeteer, and it knew every string to pull. The voice trembled with that same reassuring softness she'd used when I'd panic over stupid things as a kid. "I'm outside. I'm hurt. Evan, don't leave me out here." Tears blurred the room. My chest cracked open. My heart sprinted toward the memory of her. "I have to." I choked. "No." Carl pinned me to the floor. "That is how they break the lock." The cabin shook violently. Dust rained from ceiling beams. The shutter on the nearest window flexed inward as if something pressed a hand or many hands against it. My sister's voice dissolved into wet laughter. The voices all around us sharpened. "Open. Let us in. You're one of us." Carl leaned close, his voice a rasp barely audible over the assault. "You live through tonight by doing one thing. Hold on to who you are. Don't give them your fear. Don't give them your grief. Don't give them your name back." the one they kept repeating like a chant, the one part of me they already owned. The fire flared violently as if fighting back, and for a moment the voices recoiled, shrinking into the cracks. "You're not theirs," Carl growled. "Not yet." The room shook again, harder. A nail shot loose from the door frame like a bullet. I couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop hearing the voices tunneling into all the cracks inside me. But Carl's grip on my shoulder grounded me. "You want to know how people disappear?" he whispered. "They stop believing anyone's coming to save them. They surrender to the quiet. They follow the voices that promise comfort." The voices shrieked and howled outside the cabin, a tantrum of denied hunger. "And that's when the wilderness swallows them," Carl said. "Not because they're weak, but because they were alone when it mattered most." The fire roared high again. Sparks shot upward like defiant stars. Outside, the voices faded. Not gone, waiting, watching. The cabin exhaled a long, groaning breath as the pressure eased. Carl finally released me, and I slumped to the floor, trembling but alive. He sat back too, exhausted. We listened as the last of the whispers slipped into the trees like retreating wolves. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was earned. Carl turned to me, voice low. "You survived night one." I nodded, every muscle heavy and sore from terror. "There'll be more nights, won't there?" His answer was a quiet, steady truth. As many nights as it takes for you to stay alive long enough to not be the person they want anymore. My breath steadied. The fire glowed, and for the first time since the clearing, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like someone who had made it, through fear, through darkness, through the hands that scraped the windows of my mind. I looked toward the shuttered window. The forest wasn't done with me. But I wasn't done with life. Not now. Not after this. The Pacific Northwest doesn't just take those who vanish. Sometimes it leaves a survivor behind to tell the truth. And I'm still here.